but she's a Coney Island whitefish queen.
Hey guys. Again, immediate technical screw up right from the beginning. How's it going, true believers? Welcome to the morning warm-up. It's morning somewhere, just not here. So today we are actually on episode, I'm out of practice, episode 22. Who knew we'd make it this far? So I just want to say hello to my friends out there, wherever you are in the planet, and you're tuning in. I hope you're staying healthy, being safe, and wearing your masks. I got mine handy here. Let's see, which one do I have here? My favorite mask today. This is my favorite mask today. It's the my Comics Code mask. So wear yours, okay? And stay safe, guys. So my guest today is one of my favorite human beings on the planet, actually in the world. And in the world of comics, planet and the world are the same thing. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm really tired. In the world of comics, though, this guy's meant everything to me. In the world outside of comics, pretty much the same thing. So I can't begin to tell you how much I love this guy. And also how difficult it is to get him to do something like this. First of all, he rarely does interviews. To do something like this that involves technology, forget about it. But that's part of his charm. So it's going to be the one and only Christopher Priest. Now, before I begin, last week I introduced you guys to my co-host, Steve Wacker. He actually is more like a sidekick, kind of like a Jarvis to my Tony Stark, only less useful than Jarvis, a lot less useful. Well, after 1 week of doing the show, Steve was exhausted and he needed a show off. Steve, wherever you are, I hope you're recuperating. I hope you're doing okay. Catch your breath. I know it's a lot to do this thing. I know it's a lot to be in my presence. I hope you're well, and my hopes, my prayers go out to you and your family. Anyway, let's get on with this darn show. Let me bring the man in, my favorite dude, Jim Priest, Christopher. All right, first things first. How are you, man?
Oh, I'm doing fine. How you doing, Joe?
I'm doing great, man. I know you hate this. I can see you're like literally cringing in your seat with this thing, man. But thank you. That's
all right. This too shall pass. Yes.
Listen, thank you so much for doing this. Now, just for the sake of the interview, because I knew you back in the day when you were Jim, but people know you as Christopher or Priest, or both. What would you prefer me to refer to you as during the show?
Oh, it would be weird if you didn't call me Jim.
Yeah, that's what I figured. Okay. Because I was gonna say Jim no matter what.
It's Christopher James, so I'm still Jim.
Okay.
And people who knew me in that context, they still call me Jim. And that's kind of how I separate the newbies from the classic guys like Bob Harris. When I hear from him, he calls me Jim. So
right.
There you go.
Yeah. So you grew up in Hollis, Queens. We're both Queens boys, right?
Yeah.
Can you? I'm sorry. Before I even start, I want to remind fans that we're going to try to get to a Q&A at the end of this. I got a ton of questions. Actually, I usually don't get as many questions as I did in advance as I have for you, Jim. So anyway, but if fans want to sneak a question in, put it on the feed. I cannot read the feed, so folks at Marvel. So it takes a little bit of time. If you ask your question, it'll be picked up by the guys at Marvel, and then they'll text it to me. So get your question in quick if you want me to ask it if there's time. So you grew up in Hollis Hills, Queens. We're both Queens guys. So tell me a little bit about that upbringing and how that got you into the world of comics.
Just real quick, single mom. Mm-hmm. Me and my sister growing up in New York City. Latchkey kids. We took part in a busing program in the 1960s, so we were bused to a Jewish neighborhood, and I went to a school in a Jewish neighborhood for the first, 9 grades. So I had this sort of bifurcated life where I had like this group of friends at school who were white and mostly Jewish friends, and then the kids at home, my friends at home, were the black kids around the neighborhood. So I had this very strange, sort of set of differences growing up. And then when it got time to go to high school, I applied for a vocational school. Like there were schools that were like the School of Art Design, and there were schools like that would teach you to sing and dance, performing arts. And there was a school that taught journalism, writing, that kind of thing. So I think now it's called the New York School of Media Arts.
Huh.
And I went to that high school. I applied and got into that high school. And in the senior year, New York City had a high school internship program, and I took part in that program. And I applied to, I think, 5 law firms because I was going to be a lawyer. I don't know how I got off the track here, but I was going to be a lawyer. So I applied for 5 law firms and Marvel Comics because I saw Marvel Comics on the list, and I was like, well, I can't not apply for that.
Right.
And then I ended up blowing off all the appointments for the law firms because at that time in my life I was 17 and kind of, immature and so forth. But the Marvel thing I showed up for. So I actually came to the Marvel interview, and I was in the outer office there at 575 Madison Avenue with a bunch of artists who all had these portfolios, and I was the only writer. But at the time, I was a writer / artist, so I'd actually drawn a little comic book and lettered it and all this other stuff. So I had the whole package with me. And through the door comes the tallest human being I'd ever seen in my life. And this was, of course, Jim Shooter.
Right.
And I thought, not a chance. It's just me and a bunch of white kids, and this is never going to happen. And to my utter delight, Jim decided to roll the dice and take a shot with me. And I landed the gig, and I figured I'd work at Marvel for, I had the internship, and then I started doing some freelance work, scut work, being an assistant to one of the editors there, and literally running errands and cleaning up and so forth. And I figured, well, I would do that until I went off to college, and that was 40 years ago, and I never made it out of the comic book ghetto. So here I am.
So you jumped ahead on me here. Because no, it's okay. Because what I want, can you tell me though what was that inciting moment for you when you picked up? Do you remember your first comic book?
Sure.
I
mean, who doesn't? Yeah.
Well, yeah. Tell me about it.
All right. So I had some childhood disease, measles, mumps, whatever it was. And so I was bedridden for about a week. And my mother was foolish enough to go to the local Five and Dime, and she bought some comic books. And she brought home a couple of comic books. And I don't remember what the other ones were, but the one that fascinated me was Superman's pal, Jimmy Olsen.
Really?
Yeah, it was Superman's pal, Jimmy Olsen. And I had seen, the George Reeves serial, so I realized he had a pal. I realized Jimmy Olsen was there, but I didn't really realize he was his pal. But anyway, so it was an issue where Jimmy, for whatever reason, was dressed like a pirate. And it was in those days when Murray Boltinoff or Julie or whoever was editing in those days, they would come up with these concept covers. And then, somebody like Carrie Bates walks through the door, and they hand them this assignment and go, all right, write a story that goes with this cover. So you get this high concept.
Right.
This is the old school editors. You get this high concept, and then you have to go and make it, make it into something. So it was this, really silly high concept story, but it got me hooked on comic books. I'd never read a comic book before, other than like Archie, which I didn't really gravitate toward, and I kind of stuck with it ever since. Yeah,
it's amazing. So I mean, did it affect you? Because I know it affected me when I was younger. To living in Queens, that Peter Parker lived there. Was that something you were cognizant of as well when you were reading at that age?
No, it wasn't until a few years later when, again, and I blame my mother, so it's all her fault. And she had read in a newspaper about a controversial issue of The Amazing Spider-Man.
Oh, go ahead. Yes.
Where Spider-Man's pal, again with the pal, Spider-Man's pal, Harry Osborn, was hooked on drugs. And my mother thought this would be like a good life lesson for me, so she brought this comic book home. So I'm reading this thing, and it's I think it's Jerry Conway, and I believe it's Gil Kane, and it's inked by John Romita Sr. And that's just the cream of the crop. That era was just that was the perfect Spider-Man era. And once I read that, I just never looked back. Marvel just became. I went, oh my God, because see, the DC stuff, it all took place in Pleasantville.
Yep.
It took place on this very benign planet, and Clark Kent would wink at you at the end of the story and that kind of stuff. Marvel, there was no winking at Marvel. There was no winking. Okay, and instead of there being a made-up city or a made-up environment, it was the world outside my window. It was literally, he lived in Queens. He had this aunt, that reminded me of my grandmother and the relationship I had with her, and he had these stressors in his life that I had. I had those stressors. We were, as low-income African Americans, we were much less concerned with investment as we were in survival, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah.
So, we had a whole different mindset, and that mindset in my real life experience was mirrored more in the Marvel comic than in the DC comic, and that's how I kind of started transitioning.
It's funny because every time we've known each other for 1,000 years, and every time I talk to you, I learned something completely new that I didn't know before, right? And there's a certain commonality, I think, to our experiences, and that I find at least. And your mother did exactly the same thing that my dad did. I hadn't read any superhero comics, and my father, I don't know if he saw it on TV or if he read it in a newspaper, but he came up to me and he said, "Do you know a guy named Stan Lee?" And I'm like, I have no idea who you're talking about. And what happened was, these were the reason these Spider-Man anti-drug issues were such a big news was because there was going to be no comics code on it, right? So this is like,
that's right. Yeah, that's how it ended up in paper. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not sure. I mean, maybe you have a better idea of like where your mom saw Stan. I can't recall if my dad saw. My dad just said on the news, so I wasn't sure if he meant in the newspaper or on TV. This guy Stanley, he took me by the hand to the candy store. And he got me these issues of Spider-Man with the idea that what better way, because my neighborhood was riddled with drugs, right? So what better way to teach my kid about the evils of drug addiction than through this Spider-Man thing and this comic that he really had no idea what it was. And he was 1,000% right. It worked, except that it probably cost him more in the long run because I didn't become addicted to drugs. I became addicted to comic books.
Right.
So
yeah, me too.
It's a bit like you and I were probably like literally going to to different stores, but at the same time picking up these books and reading them at the same time. And it was like you said, it was such an incredible creative period. And then that was followed by Spider-Man 100 and the extra arm thing.
The arms,
freaking out as a little kid. I was so freaked out by that.
It was mind blowing, wasn't it?
It was like,
and the vampire guy. What was his name?
Morbius,
the vampire.
Morbius. Oh my God.
Morbius.
But Spider-Man getting the extra arms literally physically upset me the same way. I remember the old Batman TV show. There was that one episode that ended in a cliffhanger. I forget who the villain was, but they put Batman and Robin into this machine, and smoke came up, and then there was just skeletons in those suits. Couldn't sleep, man. I couldn't sleep for days watching that stuff.
Yeah.
But anyway, so let's fast forward a little bit here.
Let me disclose something completely private and completely inappropriate. Okay.
Yeah.
So the Batman TV show, it premiered in I believe it was 66.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Okay. It was right around 66. So the reason I remember is I remember watching the premiere because I had just come home from the hospital where I had been circumcised. I wasn't circumcised at birth. I was circumcised when I was 5 or whatever it was, 4 or 5 years old. So I vividly remember that.
I'm sure you do.
Yeah, I mean, you don't remember if you're circumcised at birth. You don't remember it, but if you're 4 or 5 for the rest of your life, that's an experience you will never forget because it takes a long time for that to heal. And yes, so that's my Batman TV show memory. I watched the pilot when I came home from the hospital.
So do you, when that show airs, do you immediately just have like these war
I
flashbacks?
just got to cringe. And, oh my God!
Oh.
Yeah. The episode called Hey Diddle Diddle. It was called Hey Diddle Diddle, and the Riddler tried to burn down the Batmobile, and that didn't work. And he got Batman drunk. He slipped him with Mickey, and then he had Jill St. John pretend to be Burt Ward, which was like a real stretch. But she looked that costume, man, in the Rob costume. So yeah, it was just, I loved that show. I loved every moment.
It was great. It was perfect for the time. So back to Marvel now, right? So 79, you join the editorial staff, and you're working with Paul Lakin in Crazy Magazine. But you know, again, really important. You are become the very first African American editor in comics. I mean, full-fledged editor. Now I want to show a little something here because I think this is historically important here, Jim. Let's look at that. Look at those photos, man. Look at that. That you were a sexy man. You were a sexy.
Oh yeah.
I love it. So now you're the first African American editor at Marvel. Are you know, is this something that you're implicitly aware of that you realize the importance of, or is it to you it's like, hey man, I this is my job and I'm just going to go do it? How, you know, what was the feeling for you right about at that time?
I had no idea.
Yeah.
I had no idea that I was the first anything at Marvel. I was just happy to be working there. I was just thrilled to be working there. The place was a zoo in 1979. It was just, if you ever read any of the old Stanley soapboxes, he really captured the flavor of being up there on the floor. John Romita Jr. was my first friend up there. He was a teenager as well. He was the key operator for the Xerox machine.
Okay.
He was glad to see me. So the first thing he did was he came over and he took the key off from around his neck and said, "Here you go." You know, and that's how I met JR. But in those days, you have to understand, everyone who worked at Marvel was also a tradesman. So you had Maurice Severin, who was the art director at that time. John Romita Sr. was up there as well. He became the art director at some point, but at that point, Marie was running it. Jack Abel was up there in the bullpen, and then you had Marv and Len would share an office in the back with Dave Cockrum. So I was eventually working with Larry Hama, and then Carl Potts was next door to Larry Hama. Al Milgram shared an office with the writer Joe Duffy. Eventually, you know, Denny O'Neil, you know, God bless him, he came aboard. I mean, it was lousy with people, with incredibly talented people. Everybody up there could either write or draw or color or letter. And in those days, when we got behind schedule on something, we just closed the door, ordered up a bunch of pizza, everybody took a page, and we all just dived in and got the job done.
Literally that's like a Hall of Fame 10 times over in that one office. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I did hear about the madness. I also heard about you on roller skates.
Oh yeah. So it was a pretty big place. And I love to roller skate, and I just went, well, why don't I just bring my skates in? Because I had to constantly go to the stat room, which was all the way around the corner. And so I was rolling around the place and going up to the 9th floor, the executive floor, with my roller skates, where you know, the bosses were, and they had no sense of humor up there, and they just thought we were all a bunch of children anyway. And so Jim Shooter told me that he didn't mind the roller skates. Actually, there was someone working in the stat room who was wearing roller skates, and that's where I got the idea from. Carl, I forgot Carl's last name. At any rate,
Potts?
Not Potts. He was a stat guy. He worked in
stat
guy. All right. So Shooter said, "I'll make you a deal. You could, as long as nobody complains, you can wear the roller skates. But if anybody complains, you got to take them off." And I said, "Fine." You know, and for weeks that wasn't a problem until, you know, one day Jim Salicrup, with his big mouth, you know, hello Jim, he went to Jim Shooter and complained about the roller skates, and I had to take the skates off.
Wow. Okay. They must have bothered him. What are you gonna do? right?
I don't know. I love Jim. He's a great guy. Don't get me wrong. I don't know, but I don't know why he did that. Whatever he did, it's not a big deal.
Right. So now you made your professional writing debut, right, with the Falcon. Again, I mean, can you tell us? I mean, at this point, you're a young editor, writer. You get your first gig. Also, you get your first editing gig, which is a no prize book, right? But the Falcon, right? So here you go. You're starting your career. You're trying to find your voice. Give us a little bit of that experience of being handed that book. Oh, did you freeze up? Okay. Let's see. All right, let's try to get Jim again. Hang on, guys. It's not a show without a mess up. Here we go. Let's see if this works. Here we go. We're back, but I don't have your picture. Hang on.
Oh,
wait. Let's see if I do or don't.
Wait, it's me.
It is you.
Yeah. You got me now?
I got you now. Cool.
All right.
So, so we're talking about the Falcon. Your first foray into writing. I mean, well, first of all, when you got to Marvel, right? So you're now working in editorial. You're working your way up through the system. Is writing the goal, or is it something that just somebody said, "Hey, you want to try it?" and away you go?
Well, basically, I wanted to be Frank Miller. This is before anyone ever heard of Frank Miller, but basically, I wanted to be writer/artist.
Right.
So, one day I'm in the bullpen, and I was a big Neil Adams fan. I still am. But I was in the bullpen, and I had some of Neil's work, and I was doing Neil Adams swipes, and I was practicing artwork in the bullpen. And Joe Rubenstein, the inker, he comes walking through the bullpen. He looks over my shoulder and goes, "What you doing there, Jim?" And I said, "I'm drawing." And he goes, "That's not drawing." And he says, "I hear you're a good writer. Why don't you stick to writing?" And he sort of pats me on the back and he goes down the hall. Right. So, I'm 17 years old, and the professional told me that I have no shot. And, it kind of destroyed my confidence. So I kind of concentrated on the writing.
So you get handed the Falcon. Now what's your goal here? How old are you now when you're writing the Falcon? At this point.
All right, so the Falcon. See, Jim Shooter was grooming me to get my writing together, which is something he really didn't have to do. The interns there in those days, they're there to make. They're free labor. They're there to run errands and fetch coffee, and But Jim really spent a lot of time with me, working on my craft and bringing stuff up. So he gave me a lot of homework. A bunch of stories that I did not get paid for, a bunch of stories that I did get paid for that were put into inventory. Cool. Most hopefully to never be seen again. The Falcon was one that I actually did get paid for, issue 1 of the Falcon. And he handed that out to, he gave that story as a tryout to a prospective artist named Paul Smith. And so the artwork came back, and it was just this phenomenal stuff. And Jim made copies of it and started showing it around the office, but the boards hadn't been lettered. So all the editors, they got to look at Paul's art, but they never read any of the story behind it. So Paul just took off. His career took off immediately, and he was offered all sort of assignments, while I continued to sort of struggle there. So it was Jim's thought to publish the story, not as part of an anthology or something, but why don't we go ahead and write 3 more and package it together as a miniseries? So he decided to team me up with a new guy named Mark Bright, and that's how that friendship and that collaboration began.
Yeah, I mean, Mark is phenomenal, a great storyteller.
Yeah.
It's funny. So you get teamed up with two guys that ended up becoming sort of industry legends in so many ways, and yourself as well. So, but that's also, I mean, it must have been an incredible experience, sort of learning under Jim Shooter. I know he had specific ways that he expected stories to be told at Marvel, right? And every editor in chief comes in with their own perspective on things. But I remember being up at Valiant, and he had some hard and fast rules about storytelling and how to put it on the page and how to write it. Was he tough on you?
He was brutal. 15 drafts of the Captain America graphic novel that never got published. I don't even know where that script is.
Wow.
Just absolutely brutal, and lots of times when I just wanted to quit. But at the end of the day, the fact that the guy took an interest in me and invested this much time in me, and what really got me through is that I saw that he was just as hard on everybody else. Yeah. It wasn't like he singled me out or anything. The flip side, though, is as I've grown past this, and obviously I'm leaping ahead in the history here, but as I've grown past this, I look back and I see that a lot of what Jim was teaching was structure, and he was teaching it sort of like training wheels, and he actually took me into Stan Lee's office, and I sat down with Stan, which was just great, and Stan Lee pulled out some Jack Kirby original boards, and Stan Lee was teaching me sequential storytelling and how to set up these shots and why Jack does this way and so forth and so on. And what I came to understand is that Jack Kirby knew the rules so well. Yeah. Because if you look at some of his early work, his work looks like it looks very commercial like everybody else's. And then once he started to develop his own style, he started breaking the rules where he wanted to break the rules because he understood what the rules were. So Shooter is teaching me what the rules are. So by the time I got to you and Jimmy, and again, I'm jumping around here, but by the time we got together on this Marvel Knights thing, you may or may not recall that I turned in a fairly conventional script to Black Panther #1, which you guys rejected because it was just very straightforward. It was very Don McGregor, and I love Don McGregor, and I'm not knocking Don McGregor, but that's not what you wanted. You wanted to break down some of these walls and explode some of these stereotypes, and you had a very specific creature in mind for the Black Panther. So I turned in that script basically according to these Shooter rules that I was learning when I was 17, 18, 19 years old. And because I understand those rules of storytelling, now you and I could sit down and turn all that stuff on its head.
Right. Well, one of the things that we talked about during that period was I'm trying to remember that first draft, but because this goes right.
Once upon a time in Wakanda, there was it was boring.
No, what I'm saying is, but that story
expect it to be.
But that story took place. That first issue took place primarily in Wakanda, right? And this goes back to your DC thing that you were saying as a kid, where you knew that this stuff took place in some fantasy mythological universe and not our real world. And then you and I had that discussion about that. Like that's one of the reasons we took Black Panther into the Marvel Knights line was that first of all there was no Black Panther book out, right? And it was one of the absolute gems of a character that Stan and Jack had created, yet it had never really taken off, right? It never really had like a run that would last 50 issues, whatever it may be. Maybe it did, but it was. We wanted to do something that would like really shake people up, and the conversation we had was like, we got to bring him to the States. Bring him to the States. Do Coming to America, and then when we go to Wakanda, then it's just like, whoa, this place exists, and that's where you just destroy the story in a good way, right? You bring T'Challa into New York, into the hood, and you have this like incredible regal king and his entourage.
Yeah,
It's
in a Mazda Miata, in a convertible 2-seater car,
It's what I love
but
about your writing, Jimmy, is that not only do you throw stuff in, but then you throw this other stuff. You throw stuff supporting characters that is such an incredible juxtaposition to story and place. Like Quantum and Woody was which predates Panther probably by a year or so. Is where I think you found a particular voice and a particular methodology, like you throw the goat in, right? There's stuff like that that's so unexpected, and yet it becomes part of the world. And in Black Panther, I mean, Zuri to me was just comedy gold when put into that situation, along with the rest of the cast. I think I lost you. I did. All right, we're gonna try one more time. Reconnecting. There is a poor network connection, folks. So hold on. Let's see. Hang with me. Priest just text me. Arg. Sorry, guys. Trying to connect. There we go. Hello.
Yeah, I'm back.
We're back. Okay.
Is that me?
Who knows? It's either your end, my end. It's just saying that there's a poor connection somewhere.
Sorry. Yeah, you saying Zuri was one of those.
Yeah, Zuri was just like, I mean, it's one thing to have Dermalage, but then you throw Zuri into the mix of this, who's T'Challa's bodyguard and has no filter, and then my favorite character, next to T'Challa in the book, Everett K. Ross.
Yeah, and I think once you explain to me that basically that we don't have to follow any rules, that you were taking a whole new look at Inhumans, at Daredevil, at Punisher. You were taking a whole new look at this stuff, and that was now it's kind of commonplace for Marvel to invite a new team onto a book and go make it fresh and let's see what you got. But back in those days, Joe, when you took over Iron Man, you were expected to pick up where David Michelinie left off and to stay in that voice. Yeah,
it was Kurt Busiek who was writing the book at that time.
Well, whoever. I'm just saying. Yeah. Whoever the writer was. I mean, you were expected to, when you took over Superman, you were kind of expected to kind of drive in that lane. And you guys. So that's what I was laboring under that impression, and I was reluctant to take the book on for that. I think for that reason, but once you kind of like explain, and I went, okay, you asked for it, let's experiment. Let's go out and do these other things. And without making Panther himself look silly, we were able to inject this generous amounts of humor, and also address head on the reservations of our target audience. Here's the reasons why retailers may be reluctant to buy it, to order it, and why fans may be reluctant to buy it. And I just kind of wrote down this list of reasons why, and had Everett Ross articulate them, and had this awful, borderline racist stuff come out of his mouth.
Yeah.
Because it became the book was really Everett's journey, his cultural awakening about not what black people are like, what Africans are like. Because we're not talking about African Americans. This guy is a king. He is a sovereign of this nation, and that was something that I thought that was interesting to explore. So I appreciate that. Thank you for that opportunity.
Now, when we were working on the idea of Everett K. Ross, now I've read in other sources that you were thinking, you were hearing Chandler's voice from Friends when writing Eric. Well, I remember when you and I were talking about
Matthew Perry. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he looked like Michael J. Fox.
Michael J. Fox. Yeah, because that's the voice I always heard.
But the voice was Matthew Perry. I was doing Matthew Perry.
Okay.
Ross, I created Ross over in Kazar. I was writing Kazar, and I transplanted him into Panther because I thought this is what Panther needed. He needed this attaché, because in the real world he would have somebody, if not a team of somebodies, accompanying him and facilitating his visit. And I thought, well, here's a character that we're not using because Matt Idelson, who is my Vampirella editor, fired me. You fired me, you asshole. I'm sorry. I can't say that. Anyway, you fired me up at Kazar. So I said, okay, well, I'll just move Ross over to Black Panther. And Matt and I get along great now. We're great friends. We're moving in together. So,
well, I want to also go back to because actually, you know what? Let's stay on Black Panther for a second because I had no idea. I'm sure you had no idea, but you were creating. You not only were you taking this concept that was created by Jack and Stan, and you took a lot of what Don McGregor had created, and you started to mix this all into your sort of style and your voice and your humor, and you created so much more of the world on top of the world that was there. I mean, in a lot of ways, you also start to define a lot of the stuff, right? Because there were a lot of things in Wakanda were just sort of said in passing, and you kind of dug in there. And now comes the movie, right? This game changer of a movie, and so much of what's on the screen, with the exception of the purity of Panther and Wakanda, so much of that came out of your head, right? And Mark Teixeira's pen. I was virtually in tears watching that movie, simply because I know what creating this stuff meant to you. You went to to a premiere of it, didn't you?
Oh yeah, I was at the premiere. Actually, most of the Panther people were there. A lot of Panther creators were there, including Ta-Nehisi and Don McGregor. And but I want to just say, and thank you for that. But I just want to say that so much of that infrastructure of Wakanda, if I was going to bracket some of this creativity, obviously Stan and Jack, they created this remarkable character. When you approached me to do the book, I went back to Fantastic Four. I went back to the original concept. And this was a guy who was very shrewd, very capable, rich, powerful, and he beat the Fantastic Four single-handed and then laughed at them. Okay? And somewhere along the line, other writers, and no disrespect to any other writers, they had kind of lost sight of how powerful this guy is. So I was going off of the implication, stuff that had not been, that had not arrived on the page.
Yeah.
Like he has these plans to battle Galactus if Galactus ever showed up, and then he has these massive war machines that are hiding under the ocean in case anyone starts screwing around with Wakanda. Of course he does. I'm just going based on the implication. I'm going, if this, then that. Mm-hmm. So if Stan said this, then that. If Don McGregor established this, right? The gorilla tribe and the stuff in the mists and all these different areas of Wakanda and all these different unique characters, then that. Mm-hmm. Okay, so it made sense to me that if there were these different tribes, Wakanda would either be in an ongoing state of civil war like the Congo or places like that, or Panther would have been smart enough, T'Challa would have been smart enough to have figured out some way to hold all of these different powers and these different belief systems and these different tribal systems, hold all of them in tension. And that's so now you have this sort of paradox where you have all these tribes that are just held in this tension, and it can't be a political thing. It needs to be a religious thing. So I thought, well, why not the order of the Dora Milaje? Mm-hmm. That that each tribe sends one of their representatives there, blah 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 blah, and that's now the peace is kept in Wakanda, and that's how he managed to.
Oh no. Oh boy. Sorry guys. This is probably going to be the course of the interview. So hopefully it's interesting enough that you guys are sticking around. We'll try Jim again. Here we go. It's raining. Come on, Skype. Be kind. No love. Do it one more time. Oh, Priest just texted saying that was him, so maybe he hung up. Oh, his internet went down. That could be a problem, guys. Sit tight. Okay, he says try now. Hang up. Give it another go. Yay!
All right, so I think I think this is me. That's I live out in the county, and apparently we've been having some internet issues.
Right.
Of course, it only happens when I actually need it for something. This hasn't happened in a long time, but apparently some of this has got to be me.
That's all right.
What I was saying is that I was just building on stuff that people had done before. So, Stan had done this thing. McGregor and others had built out that world. I came along, did my thing. Now Ta-Nehisi comes along, and he does this brilliant stuff that I sit back and go, why didn't I think of that? And I've been asked and approached by Marvel on several occasions to revisit Black Panther or do, Son of Panther or do like the Black Panther or special this or whatever like that. And I've kind of always shied away from it because I feel like, I blasted Black Panther into outer space. So we really jumped the shark, Black Panther in space, And I feel like the character is now in the hands of this next generation, and the brilliant things that Brian Stelfreeze came up with, and a lot of Brian is up there on that screen, and I'm just in awe of the innovations that have come after me. The only thing that kind of bugs me is in the industry, there's now this kind of, I don't know, it bugs me when somebody comes along and says what you did never happened. So Reginald took the character, and he took it and he did a great job. He did a brilliant job. He and JR, and it was really Reginald Hudlin that made the character, in my opinion, made the character commercially viable, because he sold a lot more Black Panther comic books than I ever did. But it really bugged me that continuity-wise, it's like, well, we're not going to pick up from where you left off. We're going to just act like that never happened. Right. We're going to close the chapter on that. And I went, wow, that. So when Marvel started repackaging them and bringing the book back in these collected volumes, that was great, and I was really happy about that, because it just kind of validated, yes, it did happen, and here it is, and I felt a lot better about it.
Well, you're rethinking of the character while also still acknowledging the past, right? It caused a sort of awakening for me, or at least a realization of something. So here we are working in Marvel Knights, and I've never been an editor at Marvel. I've never been sort of hardcore into the fandom of Marvel, right? I'd done work for Marvel, but I didn't realize how much passion was behind some of this stuff. So you had this insight, and I just thought, well, that's awesome, right? Not realizing what kind of trouble with fans it would get us into, but you had this insight where you looked into Panthers joining the Avengers, and you sort of peeled away a layer and told the story about why he really joined the Avengers, and that screwed with people's heads. And then there was that moment. Spoiler warning for folks that haven't read these books. There was a scene with Panther and the Avengers where a sniper hits Thor right between the eyes, and just knocks him out. I mean, we think he's dead, right? Next issue, you realize that he's concussed, and the vitriol, oh my God, from fans, that would never happen. Thor, the bullet would just pass it. And I mean, we're just like reading the scene in script. Oh, that's cool. Let's go. Let's do it. It's awesome. Not realizing, wow, this is going to be like a game changer. And in retrospect, you look back on this, like, yeah, bullet would absolutely knock out Thor. It didn't kill him, but it knocked him out. And your idea about, again, spoiler folks, about that the reason Panther actually really joined the Avengers was to spy on them, because he wants to protect Wakanda at all costs, and if somebody's got these living, breathing, walking nuclear missiles, well, he's going to want to know what they're about, but that was his intention. And then of course, joining them, he realizes, oh, these are actually good people. But that was groundbreaking. I mean, nobody had really thought about that at the time. Now, you may have known that Marvel fans were going to want to get Marvel Knights canceled because of that. But yeah, I mean, it was. I thought it was great.
I just couldn't make it work in my head. I couldn't figure out why a sovereign monarch would join, the Mets. I didn't get that. That didn't make any sense to me. But I didn't want to say that Roy Thomas's Panther didn't exist. I didn't want to say that Don McGregor's Panther didn't exist. So I went, well, how do I figure this stuff out? And that's what I came up with. As far as Thor goes, I don't know. I didn't think that was a big deal. And you're the editor, and it passed muster. I figured, I don't know if you went downstairs to talk to Ralph Macchio. I think he was editing Thor at the time. I don't know if you asked anybody, but you skip ahead, 25 years or whatever it's been, and the Chris Hemsworth Thor, he's been knocked out quite a few times.
Yeah,
it's not unusual. I mean, Thor is not industry. He's not Superman. You're confusing Thor with Superman. A bullet would not knock Superman out, but Thor is not Superman. If Superman punched Thor hard enough, he'd knock him out.
Yeah.
Oh, and I know that's going to start an argument now.
Too late. It's already part of continuity.
Yeah.
But again, it was one of those things that just fans just picked up on it and were really upset, and they were really upset about Panther's motivations. But when you give
why? No, go back to that.
Yeah.
Why do they care that he joined the Avengers to spy on him?
Because
I didn't even think that was controversial.
Because it was because they're only reading the beginning of the story, right? As you get deeper into the story and you understand the motivations, as issues come out, then it settles down, right? So in a lot of ways, the story did what it's supposed to do, right? It shocked and awed and made sure that people came back and read the next issue, and it changed status quo, and it changed. And more importantly, it added depth to Panther, right? Which is really seemed to be your goal throughout this, was like adding more and more depth to T'Challa. Sorry, say that 10 times. Depth to T'Challa, so he's a more rounded and fleshed out character. And again, I think you see all that stuff really represented in the movie, which is sort of an amalgam of everything, right? They cherry pick the best of the best, but a lot of the best came out of that run. So Jim, you had, and you'll know where I'm leading with this in a little bit. You had a lot of mentors, right, in your career. I know that Ralph Macchio, Jim Shooter we talked about was right. One. Ralph Macchio, Larry Hama, and the late Denny O'Neil, who I know we both miss greatly. Again, that was a special time in comics where you had like some of the greats, or people that would be the greats, sitting in these offices that are there and to have their brains picked if you so choose. I mean, again, did you look at them as mentors as a time, or did you know you were being mentored at the time?
Certainly by Shooter, and subsequently by Hama once Hama got there, because Hama's like he's like my dad, you know, and I'm practically call him dad, you know. Denny, Shooter kind of walked me into Denny's office and pointed at me and said, "Here's your new Power Man Iron Fist writer," and Denny was very unhappy about it. No, not any disparagement on me, but I was this kid, right?
Yeah.
And he didn't know me very well. All he knew is that I was, you know, Larry's assistant. What Denny didn't know was how big a Denny O'Neil fan I was.
Wow.
That I used to camp out at the candy store because I knew when the truck came. It came on Wednesdays at 1 o'clock or whatever it was, and I'd be sitting there on the sidewalk in front of waiting for the truck. Because Denny at that time was writing Batman, but he's also, you remember he wrote Superman for a brief time. And he hated writing Superman, by the way. He told me that. But he was writing, Julie talked him into writing Superman. And he wrote this whole arc where there was a sandy version of Superman, and Superman they got rid of the kryptonite and all this other stuff. And it was really exciting stuff. And I was the biggest Denny O'Neil fan. So the idea of Denny editing me, I was thrilled. But as an editor who has had talent forced upon me, I know what that feels like, and it's an uncomfortable situation. You want to pick your own talent, you know. So I didn't blame Denny, and we got off to kind of a rocky start, but it evolved into a very close, certainly the mentorship, but beyond that into a friendship, into my thinking of Denny as family, and Denny certainly was family. I loved that man, and I loved every day of working with him, and I thank God for the time that I got to work with Denny.
Well, you know, I also had I had the pleasure of working with Denny, and well, I can't say that, you know, he mentored me for a long time. He did mentor me when we were working on Sword of Azrael, and
yeah,
but it started before that. It actually started with the Question Quarterly, but I would never have had the opportunity to work with Denny if it hadn't have been for you. So you know, and this is for me the game changer, right? I don't know if it was 89 or 90 around there when I walked into DC, and you essentially, you know, gave me a job right off the street, and that really...
Oh, just because the other guy quit.
Well, no. Hang on.
That's a great story.
That's only partially true, right? Partially true, because I walked in off the streets. I'm gonna put the camera on me, so this way I keep myself from getting weepy. So you know, so I'll tell the story again, and this way people can see your reaction, going, it's not really true. So I was working at Valiant as a colorist, and then, you know, they laid off 3/4 of the staff. But I wanted to be a penciler at this point. I decided I wanted to be a penciler. I had a few weeks to put a portfolio together, and I did. And then I went back to Valiant, and I went to the art director, who's the guy who hired me in the first place, Art Nichols. And I showed him my portfolio, and Art's like, you know, this is pretty good, but you know, we're not hiring right now, right? We just had the cutbacks. I said, no, I realize that, Art, but do you know anybody at Marvel, anybody at DC? And Art, to his credit, said, I burned my bridges everywhere when I left to come and work with Jim at Valiant. But I do have one friend at DC, and he just started there. So let me call him, right? And, you know, I didn't know who he was calling. And so I'm literally standing next to Art because he's calling from the receptionist desk. And he dials you, and I could hear this loud voice, wow, right on one side. and I was like, hey, Jim, hey, listen, I got this guy, he's an artist, and he's really, really good. I'd like to, and I could literally hear through the earpiece, this person telling Art, I don't have time for this. I don't have enough books. I can't see anybody new. Why are you doing this to me? And he's just nodding. And then you guys settle on something. He's like, good, okay. And he hangs up, and he's like, just go right over to DC. He's ready to see you. So I just walk across town. I go to DC and I go to the receptionist and I ask for Mr. Jim Owsley and she calls you in your office and I can hear you barking at her too. As she hangs up, she's like, he'll be out in a little bit. And you wouldn't even see me in your office, right? Later I found out, you were just crammed into an office with
Brian Augustine
and Kim, right? Kim Yale, right?
Yeah, and Barbara. Oh, no, sorry, Brian Augustine and Barbara Kiesel in those days. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So anyway, so I'm waiting in the lobby, and here you come out, and you're all, your tie is like all crooked. You're all like, you've had a day, and you like literally say, all right, show me your portfolio, and you were like 2 pages in, and you're like, oh, you can actually draw.
Yeah.
You
don't see a lot of those. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but this is why, when I tell people about building a portfolio, I'm sure you'll agree with me on this. I tell young artists, an editor who knows art will know whether you're ready to work right now, ready to be sort of groomed into doing better work to get work, or probably not going to make it at all within the first 3 pages of a portfolio.
Right.
You don't have to do a 20 or 30 page for it, but you were like 2 pages in and you're like, oh, you got something here. And then you told me, it's like, look, I just got hired. I've got 2 books to my name. They're 2 crappy, licensed books, TSR books, and they all have art teams. So I got nothing for you. And I had these sort of sad puppy dog eyes, and then you felt bad for me, and you gave me an inventory cover. And so I went home. And that's the one I was showing a second ago. Yeah, that cover, Spelljammer. That's the cover I did. I went home and I drew it. I came back the next day. And when I came back the next day, I asked for you. The receptionist called, and you came out, and you're like, "What the hell are you doing here?" And I'm like, "Here's your cover." And you're like, "I didn't need it now." I'm like, "Well, here it is. I'm done." And then you took it. You said, "I'll go get you a voucher." And while I'm here, while I'm circling around, I'm going to go to Bob Greenberger's office, who was the managing editor at that time, to see if there are any open slots. And don't hold your breath, because even if there is an open slot, the fact that they would give it to a complete unknown who walked in off the street yesterday are probably nil. And then I must have waited out there for at least 30 to 45 minutes. And the receptionist called and said, "Mr. Owsley would like to see you in his office." And you've heard me tell the story. I walked into your office and you said to me, what are the odds that while you're sitting out in the lobby, one of my 2 artists should happen to call me up, curse me out, and quit, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, I like this guy, but based on sort of the acerbic attitude, probably pretty high, right? And you said, okay, then what are the odds that I would give this job to a complete unknown who walked in off the street yesterday? And I said, pretty astronomical. And I remember you pointed right in my face, and you said, from this day on, consider yourself the luckiest person in the history of comics. and
that sounds like me.
But Jim, I'll never forget those words, because I never wanted for work from that point on. Right? You gave me my start. You coached me through Spelljammer. You mentored me through the project. Right? You showed me a lot about storytelling. A lot about making characters, and I was terrible, man. I was terrible. But you also took a shot, man, on just somebody who walked in off the street. You didn't know me from a hole in the wall. And I did several issues of that, and then the Question Quarterly came up, and suddenly I'm working with Denny O'Neil. Not only am I working with Denny O'Neil, but you got Mike Mignola to ink a few pages over me, who's my absolute idol. And then when you started to, you were a new editor, so you're trying to create some characters, and then or reinvent some characters and launch some books. And then you had an idea of how to reinvent the Ray. And it was, I know you were kind of thinking in a Spider-Man mode, like DC really didn't have anything like that. And you brought don't. Yeah. You brought in Jaxie Harris, and you gave it to me. And I will never, ever, ever forget that. And I cannot thank you enough for taking a shot on me. I have no idea what the hell you were thinking to give me a shot on that. By the way, that cover of the Ray. Just shifted there. That cover of the Ray.
Yeah, that's Mark Beecham.
I know people could come up to me and go, man, that cover, you did an incredible job. I'm like, not me. It was Mark Beecham. That cover sold that book more than anything. It was gorgeous, man.
Well, let me go back for a second here. Okay, so I remember the story a little bit differently, but basically it's in the same vein. But I remember that you were out in the lobby. I went to Bobby Greenberger, and then I popped my head in the door of several other editors because I couldn't understand why a guy this good wasn't already working. You know, and I can't explain it, Joe. Nobody wanted to see you. I you know, that's what kept you out there though, because you know, and then I got the call from England. The guy was over in England, the Spelljammer artist, and the guy, he wanted something I couldn't give him. You know, it wasn't even me being a jerk. It was like he was asking for something. I forgot what it was. He wanted like a bigger trailer. I don't know, some demand. You know, and it was something that I just couldn't do. I was a line editor who just started there, and for whatever reason, I couldn't give him what he wanted. And he goes, you know, well, you asshole, you know, I can't do a British accent, but hey, I'm out of here, you know. And, you know, and I hung up, I looked at the phone, I hung up for a second, and I looked over at Brian, and I was like, is that kid still out there in the lobby? You know, and I just went, you know, well, why not? Let's give it a shot. Let's see if you can tell a story, and let's you know, let's give it a shot. So now the Ray, that was very purposeful. That I went, you know what? It wasn't just your art style, although that was part of it. It was your personality, where I said you would get this character, you would understand this young man and his journey, and that would be like an enormous help. So that was much more purposeful. I have no idea why you didn't get the cover. Why did I get Beecham to do the cover? I don't remember.
Probably because Beecham was doing awesome covers. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and look, I mean, it's again, I couldn't do a better job at that level, you know, where I was at. That cover was outstanding. But I remember you kept telling me about the book. You are the Ray. Just do that, you know?
Yeah. I mean, you were having some kind of issue with your girlfriend.
Yeah.
And I couldn't get you to turn these pages in or whatever. And this is Larry Hama's training. Larry would just go to the artist's house and kick his door in and take his pages off, you know. So, like, you know, I just said, you know, whatever the excuse was, I hung up the phone. I went over to your house, and I found you at your house. You had this really crappy apartment somewhere in Manhattan, you know, and you were very upset about whatever this was. I don't remember what the specifics of. I don't remember who it was, but whatever was going on with you, that was the Ray and Jenny, his girlfriend. You know, that was the dynamic that you know, that was there. And in fact, when I started writing the book, which was, you know, certainly not entirely fair to Jack, and that's a whole nother conversation. But later on, when Paul Levitz and Brian Augusta, when they put me on the book, a lot of that dynamic, when I started writing those characters, it was Peter Parker and it was Joe Quesada. That I was literally writing Joe Quesada on some level. Just based on what little I knew about that time in your life. You were a very young man. You were just getting on your feet in your career. Yeah. You know, and for whatever reason, I don't know why people do this. When you're trying to get on your feet with your career, why are you distracting yourself with the girlfriend? Because the girlfriend is always going to bring the complication, and it's always going to bring that level of, you know, distraction into your life at a time when you really can't afford it. Because I thought you were on the cusp. I said, this guy is going to be somebody. Yeah. And the last time I said that, I was working with a guy at Marvel, and Shooter kept trying to get rid of him. And every month he would turn in these Conan pages, and Shooter would appear at my door like Count Chocula with the Conan pages. And he'd give me this look, shake his head, and he'd go, are you really sure about this guy? And I'd look at Shooter and go, I'm telling you, this guy, he's got it. He just needs the experience. I'm working on him. But trust me, this guy, he's going to be somebody. And that guy was a guy named Mark Silvestri. You know, somebody gave me a shot. Yeah. So I've always been determined to, you know, to return the karma, to turn that around. And the least I could do is look at a portfolio and give you an honest assessment. And if I could give you an inventory story to see what you got, I'm there. And sometimes we win and sometimes we lose, but Kyle Baker and you and Silvestri, Beecham, a lot of these. Why am I forgetting his name now? Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. It'll come back to me. But a lot of young talent either started in my or got one of their first jobs in my office because I was one of the few people that they could go to and get an interview and get a first job out of them. So, and now it's even harder because most of these companies are doing less with more. So you mentioned Nick Lowe. Okay, so he's vice president of something over there at Marvel, and for reasons only Nick knows, he's actually editing comics at the same time. I don't know why he does that.
No, Nick is an editor. Nick is a senior editor. So
okay. Are you sure? Because it says vice president something.
No, we were talking about Steve Wacker. Steve doesn't edit comics anymore. So we miss him, but he was editing comics for quite a while.
I'm telling you, I get email from Nick. It says vice president of something. Anyway, whatever it is.
Maybe he
is. Whatever his job is.
Right.
Okay. I know that he's doing a crap load of work. He's got an assistant, or maybe had one before the coronavirus thing happened. But they're doing less with more. So editors nowadays, they don't have the luxury of time. Not that I had much in those days, but they have even less now because of how.
You mean they're doing more with less?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah, okay.
I'm old.
Because the other implies that Nick is incredibly lazy, which he might be, but...
He might be, yeah. Yeah. He threw me in the briar patch with the Spider Force.
Right, yeah.
It's a job I should not have said yes to, so I apologize to Nick Lowe. I apologize to CB Cebulski. I apologize to your publishers and to the fans and to the
Stop.
Well, the thing about it is, it's
way
just
to sell the book, Jim.
The book is sold. It's 3 issues, but it's 3 incredibly complex issues with all these characters, and I haven't been at Marvel in a very long time, so I had to read everything that and now I'm the guy who wrote Slott, Dan Slott. I had to read everything Dan Slott ever wrote, in order to get a handle on what this was. And it was incredibly time consuming, and I lost so much money writing Spider Force because I could have wrote 10 issues of Deathstroke in the time it took me to write, 2 issues of Spider Force. But thank you, Nick, for the job. I appreciate that. I'm sorry it wasn't a better job, a better experience, and hopefully next time we'll get them next time.
So Jim, I want to get to some fan questions, but before doing that,
sure.
I want to talk about 1993. You change your name, and and you start working with some creators on this thing called Milestone. But you didn't end up being a part of Milestone at the end. Can you tell us a little bit about that story?
Yeah, it's pretty simple. It's Dennis Cowan just called me out of the blue and said that why don't we start our own company? And I thought he was crazy, but he wanted to have this meeting, and he called me and he called a bunch of other people, including Mark Bright, who didn't show up. God bless you, Mark. Which was ironic because we had our first meeting at Michael Davis's house in Jersey City, and Mark lives in Jersey. It wasn't that long a drive. You could have showed up. So we're all sitting in Michael Davis's kitchen, and they're pitching this thing, and I think they're nuts, but sure, why not? And we all kind of brought pieces of these characters, of the core Milestone characters, and Dwayne McDuffie, God bless him, he brought, some of his characters. I brought characters who turned out to be Icon and Rocket. Dennis had the core idea for the Blood Syndicate and so forth. So we all were sitting around. It was like stone soup. We're throwing our ideas together. And then we spent the next 18 months putting this proposal together. And Paul Levitz was a very difficult taskmaster. So we had to really learn the business. It wasn't just we can be a bunch of creative guys and they're going to give us a bunch of money. No. We have to make the money work. So we're writing the Bible and we're developing characters and that kind of thing. But on the other side, we're also doing P&Ls and we're doing the spreadsheets and all that other business stuff that makes your head hurt. And we're doing these massive 18-hour meetings, and It's putting a lot of stress on my marriage because I'm never home because I'm at DC all day, and then I'm in DC at DC well into the night. And my wife would call up there looking for me at, like, 11 o'clock, and she'd get the voicemail, the answering machine, or whatever it was at the time, because I was in Jim Chadwick's office. I wasn't in my office. Jim Chadwick had this big design computer, so I was down the hall in Chadwick's office and forgot to tell her, well, no, call this line in Chadwick's. Anyway, by the time we got to the point where DC was ready to move forward with the contract, we're all pretty much exhausted. And we came together, and I said, well, I have a reservation, because I thought that we had all contributed so much to the development of the thing, but I felt, well, you know what, I'd rather not even say, because I love all these guys, and I don't want to, start, any kind of odds. I had a difference of opinion with the guys, and it caused a schism where the guys felt like they had to, well, maybe I was trying to make some sort of power play, or maybe they were interpreting it the wrong way. Whatever the case was, it was like, I had a disagreement, and I said, well, I'm going to step back from the group, and DC offered me the editorial liaison position. So rather than leave and be part of the Milestone Group, I remained at DC, but I was their guy at DC.
Right.
So just before that, and then they came up with the Milestone name because we had a very generic name. We were called Creative Partners Limited. They came up with the Milestone name, and then I went home and designed that logo for them and repackaged our Bible and our pitch. And I had written the Bible with Dwayne's help, but I was actually the wordsmith on the original Bible. That was written by me, but Dwayne was on the phone, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then subsequently, Dwayne expanded on and really built out that whole universe. So a lot of that ended up being Dwayne. But most of the history of the that shared universe, the origins of that universe, and the characters and locations, stuff like that. A lot of that was created by me during the development process. Yeah. So at any rate, yeah. So that's it. I'm the Pete Best of the Milestone Group. Put it that way.
Well, like I had this in my notes here. I came across this one point I forgot to mention also. Again, your career and your life is so amazingly interesting to me. I hope you write a bio one of these days, but because you've also taken hiatuses from comics where you just have disappeared, right? And I'll never forget when I was working for you up at the DC offices. One day I came in to drop off work. It was late in the day, like it was almost closing time, and you excused yourself for a second, and you came back. And you had a change of clothing, and you had a bus driver's outfit on, and I was like, costume party? And you're like, no, I drive a bus. Like, yeah. What?
Yes.
So I thought it was fantastic that you would it was like your second job, right? You would drive a shift into Manhattan, right?
Right.
Get out of the bus, change, go to work at DC. On your way home, you drove a whole group of people. And I remember during one of your hiatuses, I think did you just do that for a while? Because I remember you telling me there was something about the power of driving a machine like that. It's like nothing you experienced. But what sort of odd things like again, I know of least 2 hiatuses that you took, right? And in the second one, I know that's where you became a pastor and did a lot of work with religion and churches and stuff like that. What sort of odd jobs have you also had? Because the bus driver thing, I'll never forget.
Well, let's see. Right around '88 or so, I got really burnt out, and I said, well, it's been fun, but you get tired of banging your head against the wall, and I just dropped out of comics altogether. And I always wanted to be a bus driver. I just, as a kid, I used to pretend to be a bus driver, riding my
You
bike
also
up and
wanted to be a
down.
lawyer.
Yeah, but that's harder to do, become
Yeah,
a
yeah,
lawyer.
it's a little.
So, I went down to the bus company. I showed up in a suit and I brought my resume. And the dispatcher looked at me like I was crazy. He's like, imagine, Danny DeVito, in the cage at the tax, and he's like, the guy has a suit and a resume, and they didn't want to hire me because they felt like, that I'm having some sort of midlife crisis, and as soon as I got, back on my feet, that I would quit the bus company. And I went, no, I always wanted to drive a bus, and I loved that job, and I wish I hadn't left it. I really do, because I'd have crazy seniority by now. And then Mike Gold recruited me and talked me back into comics, and that's how I got hired at DC.
Right.
Because Paul Levitz and Mike Gold, they were really being very aggressive about increasing DC's diversity. Now, the next time, what happened was I just became very frustrated because Marvel had forced me to change Black Panther into some young hippity hoppity Black Panther, and we came up with the White Tiger character, who was Casper Cole. But that was, Marvel's, at the time, somebody's bright idea that, this is our way we can increase sales. And I was just tired of always worrying about trying to increase Panther sales. So I ended up, we started doing something called The Crew. And they teamed me up with a guy named Joe Bennett. And I was having so much fun. Tom Brevoort was the editor. Tom, Joe, and I were having an amazing time writing this very special, unique animal called The Crew. And Marvel canceled that series before the first issue came out, and we can get into that later. But they canceled the series prematurely, and that upset me a lot. But Brevoort calls up and goes, no, wait, but we're going to give you Captain America. And I went, Captain America? And I go, yeah. And I went, yeah, okay, all right, Captain America. So now I'm doing Captain America and the Falcon with Bart Sears. But eventually I lobbied them to bring, after Bart moved on, I lobbied them to bring Bennett on. So now Bennett and I were back in the saddle, and we are rocking Captain America and the Falcon. And then you had a Captain America book at Marvel Knights. And when that book concluded, marketing was like, well, the market really is only going to support one Captain America book. So I figured, well, Marvel Knights is done. Joe and I, we've been really doing a great job. I thought, doing a great job with this Captain America and the Falcon book. I felt it was only right for us to inherit to get our shot at doing the solo Captain book. And I said, oh, no, we're bringing in this other team to do the Captain America book. But what we're going to do is we're going to take Captain America out of your book and relaunch it as the Falcon. And to me, that just felt like I was being demoted. I felt like, once upon a time, I was the guy writing Green Lantern. I was the guy writing Spider-Man. I was the guy writing, Wolverine. Once upon a time, I was a writer. And somehow along the way, I became a Black writer. And that upset me a great deal. So I called Tom and I said, look, if I'm going to do this, I need some career ballast. And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, I need to do something else that has white people in it. And then I can do the Falcon. I'll be happy to do the Falcon. I love the Falcon. But if you leave me with just the Falcon, so we started to develop an Avengers spin-off book. But Tom was too busy to edit it. He handed it off to someone else. And me and the other editor didn't click. And this is what I'm talking about, bosses coming down the hall and depositing talent on your desk that you didn't pick.
Right.
So it wasn't a good mix with me and this other editor. That book never happened. So ultimately, I called Tom and I said, well, I appreciate the opportunity. And Tom and I get along great. To this day, we get along great. But I just went, you know what? And around that time, DC offered me a trio of Green Lantern prose novels. And I started writing prose. And once I did that, it kind of screwed me up for comics because I was enjoying that so much. and prose pays almost nothing. It pays diddly squat. But all I had was my editor, and it was just me and the editor, and we didn't have to go and get anybody's permission, and we didn't have to worry about continuity or any other stuff, and it was just a blast. And I just enjoyed it so much. And then I just kind of I got into this place, Joe, where every 18 months or so, I would get a call from either DC or Marvel or one of the independents, and they would offer me work, and inevitably, whatever they were offering me would end up being a minority character.
Right.
And I would say very politely, well, thank you, I appreciate that, but I don't want to be thought of as a black writer, you know. And I said, well, instead of that, what about Banana Man? How about I do a Banana Man series for you? Well, we're not really into Banana Man. So it would go like that. And I go, okay, well, thanks for calling. See you in 18 months, you know. And 18 months from now, you know, this phone rings again. It's like, hey, we're doing a new Black Goliath series. We're looking for a writer. Thank you, but no thank you. How about Banana Man? No, we don't want to do Banana Man, you know. So finally, I got a call from DC. I forgot the editor's name, but I got a call to do Firestorm. I was like, okay, Firestorm, the guy with the hair. His hair is on fire. Yeah, okay, I can do Firestorm. And we had this long conversation about Firestorm. I was very excited about Firestorm. I said, okay, let's go. And send me everything you got. Send me some reference on Firestorm, and I'll write you up a pitch. And he said, cool. Next day, FedEx truck pulls up at the house. Guy brings me this big box of Firestorm reference. I open it up. Firestorm is a little black kid. So I call the guy, I go, he's black. He goes, yeah, he's black. You didn't tell me he was black. I can't write black character. What are you doing? You know, and you know, so it wasn't really like I left comics. I felt like comics left me, you know, because I don't want to be thought of as a black writer, you know, and you know, and I know it's a controversial thing to say, but I feel like I want to be taken seriously on my own merits. And Larry and I, when we were doing Crazy Magazine, we had a couple of freelancers, and we had no idea what they looked like. They would send their stuff in through the mail.
Right.
And it was one guy that we would talk to all the time, and we hear his voice on the phone, and we couldn't tell just by talking to him. There was no hint of this guy's ethnicity. So we would be very nervous about what to say or how to joke around with him, because we don't know. This could be a black guy, it could be an Asian guy. We don't know. You know, and I thought, and isn't that great? And if I had my way, if I could do it all over again, I'd rather no one had any idea what I look like, because I don't want an editor, when he reaches for the phone or begins that email, I don't want his first thought to be black, you know, and I want to feel like that I'm eligible to write anything. So skipping ahead real quick, I'm sorry to pick up your time, but
no, this is
when I got the call from Marie Javins offering me Deathstroke over at DC, my first question was, is he black? No. And she said no, and I was like, okay, I'm listening, you know. And we chatted a little bit about it, and I started writing Deathstroke, and then, you know, you get online and you read all these stories about Priest is back, and I never went anywhere.
Right.
No one ever bothered to offer me something that had nothing to do with my ethnicity. Yeah. You know, and since Deathstroke, that opened the doors and just, you know, basically, thank God I'm a writer again, just a regular guy competing with in the pool along with everybody else. Yeah. And I'm very grateful for that. But that's what that second hiatus was about. It was just me going, you know, I need to be taken seriously. And the irony, Joe, is I feel like I got typecast because of Black Panther, when that book was never about the black guy. That book was about the white guy.
Right.
I wrote the white guy very well. I wrote a very good white guy, you know, but that book was about Everett Ross's journey and Everett Ross's evolution, you know, and his friendship and love for this guy. And we defined Black Panther through Everett. Because Black Panther, as I saw him, would not be this chatty Cathy. Stan wrote him very chatty. So that I took the liberty of, no, I think he would kind of, he's a poker player. He holds his cards close to his vest, you know. So I had him very, very taciturn and, you know, more like Batman, where you never knew what the Panther was thinking. So when we sprang the mousetrap shut at the end of the issue, you go, oh wow, So I really thought it was ironic that I would be typecast as a so-called black writer based on this comic book that was about a white guy.
Right. Jim, when we talk about mentoring, you and I have talked behind the scenes about this a lot, right? Because you would vent to me and say, hey, listen, I remember during the early days of my being editor in chief, and you were like, I'm only getting these calls. I could write anything.
I got to stop you right there. Mm-hmm. When you took that job, my first thought was, you poor bastard. And I started to call you and go, get out while you can, get out, because it's the last stop. You're one of the few people, if not one of the only people, maybe Archie Goodwin, rest his soul. What a great guy, Archie. You're one of the few people who has had that job and lived to tell it. You know that, right?
Yeah. When I got the job, I said, there's, because Archie only had it for a little bit of time, and he walked away. And I said to myself, boy, because it's something that my dad instilled in me. My dad was, we were big into sports, and my dad would bring up two baseball players, Joe DiMaggio and Ted Williams, right? Yeah. And these are two baseball players that were self-aware enough to know that as their skills started to decline or their usefulness started to decline, before they knew that was going to happen, and before it starts to happen, or right at the edge of where that starts to happen, they said done. So that you sort of leave it at the top of your game. And I remember him always saying to me, "Don't wait for a decline, right? Leave at the top of your game, and move on to other things." Yeah. And I remember my 9th year as editor in chief, and going into Dan Buckley's office and saying, "I'm done. We're killing it." And I just want to move on. If there's something else in the company where I want to leave at the top of the game, right? Just leave that memory out there. And then he got it, and he asked me to stick around for one more year, which I think got me to the same number of years as Stan. But I was proud of the fact that Stan and I are kind of the only guys who got to walk away, sort of call the shot at that point. And move on within the company. And I think there are times where I miss it, where I miss just like being in the middle of it. But I'm glad that I walked away when I did, right? Because I still feel I'm useful to the company and yada yada yada. But it was time for me to go on to do other things in the company, and I've had a lot of fun since. And I love and bleed, Marvel Red, always red, whether I'm here or not.
But you're still in a position to do creative things.
Oh yeah.
At the company, which is great. See, I wouldn't want CB's job. I'd want Tom's job. I don't even know if I want Tom's job, but if I had to pick a job, I'd rather be like, the level beneath the hot seat than be in the hot seat. I texted CB just to check on him during the pandemic, and I was like, well, congratulations on surviving so far. He's like, yeah, so far, so.
Man, I'm telling you, the stuff that CD's going. I mean, he and I talk, and I'm like, CD man, I'm glad I'm out, because what he's going through, this is just really, really tough, right? I mean, just like holding it together, the pandemic, and we're doing well, and the outlook is good, but this is tough, man, and it's got.
But they account for the movie money separate from the publishing money. Is that correct?
Publishing. Every division of Disney has its own division. So publishing.
Yeah. Publishing. But my point is that you would think that just on the ancillary development of the material that is being generated from publishing, that somehow the publishing group ought to benefit from it more than it actually is, because people don't realize that you guys still have to, the publishing group I'm talking about now, still has to turn a profit on its own. They still have to stand on their own.
Yeah.
They're not swimming in movie money, is what I'm saying.
Oh, no. And by the way, it's a point of pride for us. It's a point of pride for us to it's what we do. We generate content, and we're about sales. It's we're not we're not, it's not a charity. We got to make sure these books sell, and sometimes it's a hard reality when you have to talk to creators about stuff. But
Right.
I want to get back to the mentoring thing because that's the other thing. Like if you were to return to comics in sort of like a full-time role, Jim, and employee, the value of you as a mentor, right? The value because you not only can you teach writing, but you can teach graphic design and art. You have that whole background. You've learned it from
Right.
the best. But I remember you and I having these conversations about like you're saying I'm just getting calls to do the black characters, and it was a realization to me because I didn't realize that I'm like, wow, that's right. He's only getting those calls. But as I moved on, and we'd have editorial summits, and when we would talk about the idea of diversity and bringing in more diverse and unique voices into comics, I see it as inclusion, right? Inclusion is the word that I like to use, right? Because it's like we want everybody in the pool, right? All the most talented people. I don't care where you come from.
Right.
And it's you get into that thing, right? And a lot of it is guided by social media, right? Which to me sometimes is not the real world. A lot of times it's not the real world, and it's certainly not. It's certainly not people at the cash register, right?
Yeah.
And that's the big fantasy, right? Because I see people with followings that would like, oh my God, I can't believe how many followings this person has, but yet they can't drive people to the cash register.
Right.
And I remember we were talking about, I said, look, inclusion to me isn't bringing in an African-American writer and putting them on an African-American character. To me, it's, an African-American character, a writer on a Caucasian female character, right? And we talked about that at length, right? And when we still have these conversations at Marvel, and I remember, one of the younger editors, said to me, "What happens?" And the editor brought up Black Panther in particular. What happens if the best pitch I get for Black Panther is from a white writer? I said, "Well, you should probably publish a book." And the editor said, "But what happens because social media will destroy us?" I said, "You're right. But the way you have to look at it is this: if you have, and this was before Ta-Nehisi had Captain America, right? If you have an African American writer on Captain America, and you have a prominent female writer on Iron Man, then that's inclusion, and eventually, it doesn't matter, right? It's just who's the best person to write that character." And we're getting to that world, right? We're finally there. But those conversations that I was having with editorial, and again, this is after I was editor in chief, a year or so. Those all stem from our conversations together about why is Priest only getting called to do the African American characters. It was eye opening to me, and you see that change start to. And like I said, Ta-Nehisi writes Captain America. And that to me, that is
let
inclusion.
me jump in for a second. Because Ta-Nehisi, when I met him, I'm sure I insulted him, and I every time I see him now, I apologize. But I went, Ta-Nehisi coach writing Black Panther, that don't impress me. That don't impress me at all. Everybody was like, oh, that was a big deal. But you want to impress me? Put Ta-Nehisi coach on Superman.
Right.
Okay. Different cultures experience life and experience the world in different ways.
Yeah.
And Superman, as one example, has only been written from one perspective. From the perspective of, there's been different experiences and different approaches to the character. But my challenge is that, an Asian American, an African American, a French person, for example, would see the world in a different way. Now, you got a character like Spider-Man. My experience is very much similar to Peter Parker's. The freelancer, the struggling freelancer, the girlfriend, the sick aunt, and that has nothing to do with the color of my skin. I can write Spider-Man because I am Spider-Man. Mm-hmm. You are Spider-Man in many ways. He's such a great character, which is why I tried to rip him off for the Ray.
Yeah.
And DC, and I don't want to throw stones at DC because I love you, DC. Don't fire me. But DC, they didn't know how to take that ball and run with it. The Ray should have been there. Spider-Man should still be there, Spider-Man, and they didn't know how to develop that character after you and I moved on. But the point is that you write what you know, and there's universal things like I don't have to be a white male photographer in order to write Spider-Man. But I think I bring my own unique perspective to Batman when they let me write Batman, or to Green Lantern, or to whatever. And I think that's the only thing that really matters. A good story is a good story, but I also think that some of these characters that really benefit from a breath of fresh air that comes in from a completely different perspective.
Well, I mean, to that point, right? You're writing Vampirella, right?
yeah. But that was Nick Ferrucci twisting my arm. Right? I was like, what? Vampirella?
But still, when I heard
half-naked white woman, But I wrote in this. I'm ripping off Black Panther in Vampirella. We had Everett Ross, who was our point of view character, and in Vampirella, she has this therapist who is now the skeptic, the point of view character, who is hilarious, and it's taken on this whole new. It's given Vampirella this whole new breath of fresh air.
Right.
That here's an approach we've never seen before with Vampirella. So yeah, you made the point there.
I mean, yeah, seriously, because when I heard you were writing Vampirella, I went,
what? So did I. Yeah.
Right? And then my next thought is, all right, I got to read that, because I know what you're going to bring to it. I know you're going to bring. You're going to bring another dimensionality to a character. You're going to build up supporting cast around that character, and you're going to add depth at some point, for better or for worse, whether people like the run or not.
I'm a clown. It's going to be funny at some point. Yes.
And that's the other thing, right? And that's the other thing, because you always insert, again, in a very traditional Stan Lee way, right? Stan would write in social issues and his feelings on those social issues, right? On moving forward, right? On racism, on all the things that were ailing the planet at that time, but he would do it through metaphor and through great humor, right? And before you know it, it's not preachy. It's just Stan telling these stories through the voices of these characters. And you were sort of absorbing these stories, and you don't even realize that there was a deeper message, but you get it, right? And I think you're one of the very few people writing today who is taking that torch. It's in all of your books, man. It's in all of your books, right? You reread that Black Panther run. You reread the stuff that comes out of Everett K. Ross's mouth, right? And
some of it's pretty racist, by the way.
Yeah. But there's a point there, right? Because you're.
But I thought, but this is what some of the readers, not all of them, this is what some of the readers are thinking, and I'm giving voice and validating it, and now we can all laugh at it and dismiss it and move on. Right. But job one, job one is to be entertaining. So Stan was always, he never forgot that mission, because a lot of writers nowadays, and I've talked to some of them. I won't mention any of them. Steve Orlando. A lot of our writers are so serious, and they're like, and they're trying to make a statement with something, and I was like, well, yeah, but don't miss the first job, which is to be. I was never that deliberate about it. You and I, once I understood what you wanted, I went, well, let's just have fun. We were having fun.
Yeah.
We never sat down and said, what statement are we trying to make with this book? We didn't have that conversation.
Right.
We just went, let's shoot for an head. Never liked it.
It was a fun time, man. It was a fun time. You know what? You and I should do something together. We work together, but I've never worked from one. We've never directly worked with each other. So let's talk about this. We should work together.
Sure.
But yeah, again, it was. I look back at some of those the old Stan Lee stuff, right? We talked about the first time that the Panther appeared in Fantastic Four, and it was, again, it's the subtlety, it's the subconscious writing or effort to get the subconscious story through, or a story through to people's subconscious. But we talk about this all the time. So you meet the King of Wakanda, T'Challa, and then there's this mysterious Black Panther who kicks the Fantastic Four's ass. Yeah. And then there's the big reveal.
It's got all the toys.
Yeah.
The gadgets and so forth.
Yeah, I mean,
that we cheat
like,
for giving it to
surgical, like a surgical takedown, and then he takes off the mask, and
the first time I read that, I'm a black kid. Mm-hmm. The first time I read that, I went, right, because it never occurred to me that the character was black.
But hang on a second, but that's the thing. So
I should have expected it, right? Yeah, go ahead.
He takes the mask off, and Stanley doesn't write one of the characters going, "Oh my God,
right.
The Black Panther's black," right? He writes, "Oh my God, it's the King of Wakanda." Right? Yeah. So right, because that's to the reader, right, who's experiencing the first black superhero, it's a thing. Yeah. But to the Fantastic Four, it's not a thing. And even going back to some of those, to the Howling Commando issues that he's, Nick Fury and his Howling Commandos, right? And that was a Benetton ad, right, of characters from all walks of life. And you would hear these characters, talk about, their mom's home cooking and all these other things in their civilian life.
Sure. Yeah.
But they never sort of looked at each other and went, "Oh my God, how cool it is that we're this diverse group of people." They just were, and they just went out and kicked ass. And right. so to me, that was the message. Reading as a kid, that's the message of hopefulness, right? Because in my world, where I was growing up, that's what all my friends were. We were just a hodgepodge of kids from all over the world. So it didn't strike me as unique in that sense. But I had an inkling that the outside world really wasn't like this. So it was that hopefulness that, this is what it's supposed to be like. This is what we want it to be like. And if you're reading this and that's the world that you're looking, so those were the messages I think that Stan was writing and Jack was drawing and all these guys were putting into the books, and they were doing it in a way, like I said, you've definitely taken that torch, and we're having fun telling these stories, and you've got to put humor in it because that's part of the Marvel formula, and it's got to be the self-defacing humor as well, right?
Right.
And
don't take yourself too seriously.
But there's always, you may not even know you're doing it. Maybe it's subconscious on your level too. But there's always a deeper message within all of this stuff. Even when you started to write the hierarchy of Wakanda, right, and the way that country worked, it was fascinating because it wasn't utopia. You know what I mean? There's a lot of stuff going underneath, sort of underneath the glossy exterior. So anyway. Now that I've sort of, given away your secret, Jim, you want to do some fan questions? Can we do some fan questions?
Oh yeah, sure, please.
Cool, man. All right, let me hang on a second. Let me prep for this. I got to prep for the fans. And your internet's spectacular right now. It's great.
Well, while you're doing that, just piggybacking off of what you just said here. Now, when I was growing up, I told you I had the white friends at school, the black friends at home. Mm-hmm. Okay, and my black friends at home, they didn't know any white people. So I would hear, this rhetoric, white folks this and white folks that, as though all white folks behave a certain way or whatever, and I'd be like, well, that wasn't my experience, and then when I with my white friends, I always felt welcome. When I went to their homes for their little birthday parties, whatever, and then these were mostly Jewish kids, and I didn't realize that Jews were a minority because they weren't to me. Every white person I knew was Jewish, so I didn't get it that they were. That they were a minority, but it was just this discovery thing. Like white people had something called their TVs had color. I was like, oh my God, and then I'd walk in their house on a summer day, but it was cold inside their house, and I said, wow, it's so cold in here. How did you do that? And the mom would say, well, we have the air conditioner on. I said, an air conditioner? Goes, yeah. I said, white people condition the air. It was amazing to me. It's like, oh man, they condition the air. That's so cool. So I didn't have these prejudices, and I didn't grow up with these prejudices, and I didn't, so there's a lot of this tribalism because nobody, the reason why we're seeing so much more acceptance of LGBTQ plus is that more and more people are coming out to their friends, to their loved ones. Okay. And now I'm being forced. I had a friend came out to me 15, 20 years ago. And now I preached acceptance as a pastor. I preached, inclusion. But now I got to put my money where my mouth is, because I'm not abandoning this. I love this person. I'm not abandoning this person. And it's only because you get to know somebody who actually is part of that group. And I've met white people who have no black friends, none whatsoever. And so all they know is what they saw on the Jeffersons, and they're making up all this. They have all these pre-packaged ideas about us, about what we are. And the opposite is true too. A lot of black friends who have no white friends. And I went, it's only when you get to know people and get in there that you start to realize we're all flesh and blood, and we're all just, reaching for the shelf here. We're all trying to make it work.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. Like I said, I was very fortunate in the neighborhood that I grew up, and I was very fortunate to have the dad.
Where was that?
Jackson Heights.
Oh, okay.
So literally, I've gone on. I've talked about it on the show before, but it's been, literally, your universe is sort of, whatever you make of it, right? So my universe before high school was on 95th Street between Roosevelt Avenue and 37th Avenue, and I know exactly where that is.
That's
where we didn't play on other blocks. We played on our block, right? We played stickball, football, everything on the street.
The next block over was like another universe.
Oh yeah,
that
was
different.
We were gangs, but it was like a whole other gang. Like they would play stickball and stuff. And I remember some summers we'd have like games against, we're gonna play Warren Street today, right? But it had to be a street that had enough kids, right? And our street was chock-a-block. And my best friends were, I'm Cuban, my other best friend was Cuban, Chinese, Dominican, Irish, Italian. I mean, it sounds like a cliche, or like I'm making it up, but I'm not. I mean, East Indies, Finland. It was crazy mixture of kids. So we didn't know any better. We really didn't know any better, but we didn't know anything different than that until I got to high school. And then I realized, the world's what's going on? What like kids were getting, going into their own cliques clearly, but some of those cliques were also, based on, your nationality, or the not even like being Hispanic, but what part of the Hispanic world are you from? Oh wow, this is weird. It's not what I experienced in life. And then then you get beyond high school, and it was a really different world. But I was very thankful for that, right? Because it exposed me to the world, to just the universe in that way. And I had no choice. It's the universe I was thrust into. But you're right. It's just it's getting to know one another that is the biggest thing. To break down walls, to break down barriers, to break down the way that we imagine other people to be.
And to not be afraid of other people.
Yes.
I mean, I feel like my life is so much richer for having had that experience.
Yeah.
But I have to remind myself that not everyone has had that experience, and that's what's accounting for a lot of this tribalism that's going on.
I'm getting really deep, sort of into my own origin, and this is your interview, but you bring it out in me, Jim. I remember my dad sitting with me, and I said I was very fortunate to have him as a father. He wasn't perfect, nobody is, but I remember him sitting with me, around the time that he thought, well, he's going to start dating, he's going to start meeting people, and I remember him saying to me, he's like, I don't care who you date, black, white, I don't care. Boy, girl, I don't care. Mm-hmm. Just be safe, be happy, don't date idiots. Pretty simple stuff.
You never know they're idiots until it's too late, though.
Yeah, well, you gotta date somebody anyway. So, and I remember sitting there going, wow, and we talked about it because in the military, was the first time that he was exposed to people from all walks of life, and gay men, straight men, they fought as a unit, and they were part of a team, and you had to care for the person next to you, because they were responsible for keeping you safe as you were responsible for keeping them safe, right? And it really just altered his world. And he brought that back with him, and I was very, very fortunate to learn those lessons from him as well, and then being in that mix, you know. But anyway, I know that you and I could talk about this forever because we've had those sort of same kind of experiences in a lot of ways where we've lived in different worlds, while coming home to our own as well. And I know fans are waiting for questions, so I'm going to get weepy with you, Jim. Again, you do this to me. So, all right, let's get some questions here. Hang on, where's my mouse? Is my mouse not working? Hold on, there we go. All right, so let's get on with this. So we got a question from DA Express. Hey man, why the name Jim Owsley? I got a lot of your books, but I never knew why.
That was
yeah. What's is Owsley the stage name, or is Owsley the ghost writer name, or is it Priest, or where are we? What do you feel on?
Well, neither one. Neither is a ghost writer name. I legally changed my last name in 1993 from Owsley to Priest.
Right.
But I was always Christopher James. No one ever called me Jim until I started working at Marvel, and I decided that I wanted to be called Jim because there was like 3 or 4 different Jims up there. So I just wanted to be like part of the club, and I was so excited to be at Marvel.
Right.
But nobody ever called me Jim, and the only people who call me Jim are people like you in the comic book business. But everyone in my entire life, growing up, I was always Chris or Christopher. Occasionally at school somebody would call me James, but it's just the last name. The rest of it is, but it was never a pen name, nothing like that.
Cool. All right. Let's see. From Modoc, Christopher Priest. You are the king of kings. Thank you for coming on the show. Was there one storyline or one character that you wanted to write, but it was vetoed by editorial for whatever reason that you wished you had fought harder for? Wow, that's a great question.
I fight hard for virtually everything, but it's one of these things where right now the direction of a storyline is linked to marketing and to how they predict something's going to perform in the market. So, for example, I wanted to kill off Captain America, and I had pitched that idea, and we'd have a whole year of, dead Cap, and then we bring Cap back. I wasn't permitted to do that, but Ed Brubaker was. There was like an interval between, my pitch and Ed's pitch, but it's just a matter of like, Ed is going to sell this number and Priest is going to sell that number, so it's like, so yeah, there's any number of ideas and the trick though is, and I don't want to like give you examples because I still may use them.
Right.
If you have an idea that's rejected, you put it back in your pocket because you know what? The business is cyclical. And you have staff turnovers, and maybe this idea didn't sell 2 years ago, but maybe it'll sell tomorrow. So you never know.
That's like I was doing some research on a project and came across. I remember Kraven's Last Hunt, one of my favorite Spider-Man stories. That story was repurposed. That story was originally pitched to DC.
Really?
Yeah. It was.
J.M. DeMatteis wrote that.
DeMatteis wrote that. If you look up Kraven's Last Hunt. You'll see the history of it.
It started in my office. I commissioned that story.
Well, yeah, he repurposed it.
Just before I got shown the door at Marvel, yeah.
Yeah, it was originally for a DC character. I can't recall at the moment, but I think it was repurposed twice before it became Kraven's Last Hunt. But go figure, right? I mean, it's one of the greatest Spider-Man stories ever told.
Absolutely.
So let's see. Jose says, what was it like working at Marvel in the 80s? I think you kind of touched on that a little bit, right? So
yeah, if you ever seen the TV series Mad Men, particularly you go watch the pilot. That's almost exactly Marvel's offices. It's chilling how much the set of the Mad Men, because in the pilot they actually shot the pilot in an actual office building because they didn't have the money to build a set.
Right.
So that pilot, when you see them walking around the offices, Marvel looked exactly like that. They had the offices lining the sides of the building. The bullpen was in the middle. and it was absolutely a zoo. It was just the most fun you could ever have, and it was racist jokes and sexist jokes, and I didn't feel singled out for the racist jokes because right behind it there would be Irish jokes or there'd be Italian jokes or whatever your ethnicity was. No one was safe. So it was an equal opportunity offensive, environment up there. The only jokes they didn't tell was Polish jokes. They didn't tell any Polish jokes, and there was a big reason for that because the boss was Polish.
Okay. Who's the boss at the time?
Shooter.
Shooter was Polish? I didn't know that.
Shooter's Polish. Yes.
I had no idea.
No Polak jokes at Marvel.
Oh my God.
But there were, all kinds of, Catholic jokes and religious jokes and political jokes and racist jokes, but not one Polish joke.
Wow. Okay, so let's see. Johnny, why did you enter the comic industry, and what keeps you here what keeps you in the industry? Well, you've bounced back and forth, but it's a good question. I mean, why, Jim? You keep getting...
The sad truth is it's all I know how to do, really. Well, that's not true. For a while, I was a graphic and web designer. I actually won 4 advertising awards for my graphic and web design. And then I pastored 2 churches here in Colorado, and so I have done other things. And of course, I still have my bus driver's license, so to fall back on.
Right.
But somebody told me that whatever you're doing when you turn 40, that's what you do. Okay. And 40 is now well in my rearview mirror. So I assume that, to my abject horror, I am a comic book writer.
You are.
I would like to be a novelist, and I've written a few novels. They're on Amazon. They're written under James Priest, so as to not further confuse or aggravate the British science fiction author. So if you look up James Priest on Amazon, you'll see a lot of procedural crime novels, a lot of cop stuff, along with the comic book stuff. But I really enjoy writing prose. And if I had my druthers, I would just move out into some remote area, to some little Unabomber shack, and write procedural crime novels that nobody reads, and I would really love that. That's how I want to retire. When I eventually hang it up, that's what I'm going to be doing. Yeah.
All right. Let's see. Deborah asks, as Doom Maniac, I want to say loved your Masks story in Marvel Double Shots, and the little back and forth with Magneto and Doom in Strom und Drang. Would you like to take another shot at the character again someday?
I guess she's referring to Black Panther.
Could be, yeah. Well,
yeah.
It says a double shot, so maybe it was a
yeah.
short...
Yeah. Well, as far as Panther goes, I really think that I would not like to come back and compete with myself. I think that would be a mistake. And
what about Dr. Doom?
Doom has a lot of possibilities, and again, and I'm invoking, the name of. I shouldn't mention his name too much. I don't want to tempt his wrath, but Tom Brevoort actually offered me like a Doom project, and I never got around to it.
You see,
I just never got around to it. He sent me all this reference, let's go on a Doom project, and I just never got around to it. But that might be something that might be interesting to dive into. Yeah.
Right. Okay, let's see. Black Pharaohs of the 25th. My question is about your Black Panther run from Marvel Knights, issue number 26, Secrets, Seductions, and Storm. I love that you brought T'Challa and Storm together. Reggie Hudlin had the characters marry in his book. Did you personally ever have intentions to further that relationship? Ooh, good question.
No, I thought that building off of what Chris Claremont did, I have a great deal of respect for my fellow writers. We're competing for jobs, obviously, but for the most part, we do actually support each other. And Chris, man, I just love Claremont so much. That's a whole nother conversation. I just admire him so much and admire his work so much. So he's the one that had this idea that they knew each other's children or whatever the thing was. And,
Right.
so when I was writing, as I did in Spider-Man Wolverine with Mary Jane and Peter, I was writing the story that explains why these two should never get married, and that they would always have this sort of special, unconsummated love. Just as in Spider-Man Wolverine, there was this whole B plot where Peter, in a moment of frustration, kisses Mary Jane, ultimately revealing his feelings for her. And the point of that story was, here's why Peter and MJ can never get together. And after I left Marvel, other writers turned it on its ear and used that business in Spider-Man Wolverine as a catalyst for them to get married, which is, they missed the point of that scene by a mile.
They got married?
Yeah, I think they did.
They did? Wow, I've forgotten all about that.
But thank God for somebody who fixed that. But the funny story about that is that I heard that rumor that they were going to get married in the comic strip, and that I guess either Stan or Jim wanted to get married in the comic books. And I went down to Shooter's office.
Yeah, actually, I'll fill in that part. Apparently, the Spider-Man strip was losing popularity, and so King Features went to Stan and said, "You got to do something to spike it," and that's where the idea for the marriage in the strip, not in the comics. Stan, I don't think was intending that to be in the comics. So yeah, I know your side of the story. So go ahead. Then you pick it up from here.
Yeah, I heard about it, and I went down the hall to Jim Shooter's office, and I walked in there, and I said, I think he was in Tom DeFalco's office. So Jim and Tom are in the office, and I walked in and I said, Spider-Man will get married over my dead body. And I think it wasn't even 6 weeks later, I was a freelancer. I was, they offered me to write the honeymoon issue, and I took it. I said, why not? Take the money and run, right? Because it was a huge issue. So I wrote their honeymoon, even though I didn't believe. Joe, I really think it's a mistake to follow the fans from cradle to grave. I think I think Spider-Man, I think these characters have a certain purpose, and they serve a certain function within the hierarchy of your mythology. And I think what you need to do what Disney has done successfully for a million years, is they have audience turnover every 8 years, every 6 to 8 years, they turn their audience over. Yeah. Turn your audience over, but at some point, either DC decided they wanted to try to be Marvel or whatever happened. But I remember the first time someone allowed Robin to say the word damn, I said, that's the end of our business now, because you are now following your audience through high school, into college, and out into their career. And now our fan base they're grown-ups, they're moms and dads, as opposed to them being the 8-year-old in his sickbed reading about Jimmy being the pirate. I had one of my teachers in the pastor in the ministry, this great pastor, Jack Wurtson, up in upstate New York. He taught me, I don't need new sermons. I need new audiences. You turn the audience over. So I thought it was a mistake to kind of allow comics to, or at least allow so much of our thing to follow the audience, off into this other direction here, and abandon.
You do realize
Superman getting married, I thought, was just a bad idea. I thought Superman getting married was the worst idea. That was a terrible idea.
You do realize who you're talking to, right? I'm the guy that
undid that. Yes,
that was me. So, but all of that came exactly from what you're talking about here, and by the way, years of going up to Marvel as a freelancer and hearing editors just complain about how the marriage just stifles the ability to tell Spider-Man stories.
Yeah.
But nobody. There was a fear of pulling off that bandage because of the repercussions. Because look, the tendency as creators, especially creators who are introduced to our characters at an age where we're sort of close to empathetic with, the temptation is to take those characters and age them along with us, right? to settle down in some way, possibly have, but then what happens to the Jim Owsley, young Jim Owsley, the next young Jim Owsley, who goes to a comic book store and wants to pick up that Spider-Man issue that they could relate to, right? Suddenly that Spider-Man is, married or has a kid, and it becomes there's a level of relatability that is gone now, right? I mean, we could talk about also the repercussions that has on stories, but
now you've got like a whole generation. You might have 2 or 3 generations by now that have moved away from comics to the point where I don't really know any 8-year-olds who read comics. I'm sure there are, but that's kind of my point here. Where Joe, you either want to be a businessman or you want to be a fan. And once upon a time, the business was run by professionals, and they were pros. Julie and Shooter and all those guys. And they came out of this publishing discipline, this publishing background. And over time, fans started taking it over. And I'm not knocking anybody because I want to still work in this business. But it's like at some point they became so into can the Hulk beat the Thing, that they kind of lost track of like, okay, what are we doing here? We're running a business here. We need to sell this stuff.
Yeah, I'll agree with you to a point, Jim, because I mean that is, it's certainly something. When I became editor-in-chief at Marvel, right, one of the things that Bill Jevis and I were keen on was hiring new editors who weren't sort of and again, this just happens through years and years and years of doing it the way that it gets done, right? But you intern at Marvel, and then you get a job at Marvel, right? And there are interns that we've hired over the course of time, but we started to look for people from outside of the world of comics, because what was happening aside from the fact that sales were, we were at death's door, was that we were writing comic book stories about comic book stories, right? This is not Kurt Busiek or Alex Ross's fault, right? Kurt Busiek and Alex Ross wrote the greatest love letter to Marvel Comics ever written, right? And took a fresh point of view that really gave you that tingle up your spine that you had for the very, very first time.
Right.
But that then, much like Frank Miller's Dark Knight, started a whole dark, gritty thing. That started a whole sort of retro thing where it was a lot of love letters to Stan and Jack and Steve and all those people. And when I came in as editor-in-chief, I remember talking to the editorial and saying, okay, guys, in my imagination, right, and I'm sure it happened in some way, like Stan would look out of his window and see like a taxi cab pull up, and maybe a woman struggling to get out of the taxi cab because she's got tons of bags, whatever it may be, and then he imagined, well, what happens if Galactus comes down right here at this moment? And how does Thor save that person, right? And that was the world outside your window. And then what we were doing sort of in the late 90s was a lot of, hey, remember that story of the lady trying to get out of the cab and Galactus coming down? What if we just put a modern veneer on it, right? So and that's what was happening, and that was because we were becoming very, very insular. As a company, and at the same time, we were fighting for our lives. We were fighting for our lives, right? So it's like, hey, that story was a hit. But so I would disagree with you. I think there are people, there's some incredible professionals in the business. You bring up Tom Brevoort's name a lot, right? I hate complimenting Tom. I really do. But Tom is, Tom is one of those editors. Not if you're working for Tom, not only do you get one of the best editors in comics, if not the best editor working in comics. You get a guy who's also going to mentor you. If you're willing to have your eyes and ears open, he is going to walk you through a process where when you work, you will. If you're a new creator, you will be better by the time you leave his office. Same thing with the editors. I mean, Tom has groomed a ton of young editorial talent that's come through. But like any business, there's really strong people. There's really people that aren't that strong. but you did grow up or come up in a golden era where you were working with some of the greats, because they were moonlighting as writers while they were also working the day job.
Right. Right.
So yes, I lost my train of thought.
Yeah.
But
no, you're right. But see, over time, what happened is that all these people who were really talented, Jim Shooter and Paul Levitz really opened the doors to the point where we all started making more money and had greater opportunity because of the innovations that these guys and others like them brought to the business in terms of incentives and decent page rates. So a lot of these people who were the artisans could make more money in their living room.
Right.
You'd have to pay me an awful lot of money to move back to New York and work in the office.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. So it's just the whole ratio changed.
Well,
whereas before, the page rates were so low, they weren't paying that much money, that some of these guys had to work in the office to make ends meet.
Well, I'm gonna tell you something, because one of the policies that we passed day one when I became editor in chief, people got really angry at me for this, but now they can get angry at you for it. If you remember when you were writing Black Panther for us, right now this book is getting incredible word of mouth. You say sales were low, but it still sold better than any Black Panther book had at the time, right? And it caught the interest of regular Marvel editorial. And you were up for, they were doing a second Hulk book. I forget what the name of it was. But
Rampaging Hulk. I named it. And they kept it there. They didn't hire me. Go ahead.
Hang on, don't get ahead of me. So they had a bake-off had a bake. I mean, here you are writing Black Panther, right? One of the best books out at that time. And they ask you to do a bake-off. And for fans that don't know what a bake-off is, it's kind of like you're trying out for the book along with other people. And you're trying out for free. And I remember you telling me that you're not going to get the job. I'm like, why aren't you going to get the job? And you said, well, it's down to me and one other writer. And the writer happens to be an assistant editor or an editor. And you're like, that's it. I'm not going to get the job. I'm like, you're crazy. And you didn't get the job. It went to the editor, right? And so what became very, very clear to me was, and again, this is just sort of company culture, things that happens over the year. It morphs into something else, right? There was a lot of internal freelancing going on at Marvel, and it started with Stan, right? Because Stan was editor in chief, and he was writing all the books, right? Now I don't know if that was considered part of Stan's salary. I don't know how it worked, but subsequent generations of people that came in were writers and editors, and so they would get paid their salary, and then they would freelance and do writing for Marvel, and so that sort of buffered the salary, and it was weird on a number of levels, but. You move forward more generations, and now what happens is you just have editors that are being handed coloring work or writing work based upon which, so literally, like if an editor was handing another editor a coloring job, that editor would hand that editor a writing job. And that's why those books, there were so many books that were unreadable at Marvel, because these were people that were not really ready to be writers or weren't writers at all. So when I became editor in chief, that was the first thing I stopped. I said, no more internal freelancing. None. So because the truth of the matter is, if you want to be a writer, if you're really good as a writer, you're going to leave. Go. Stop being an editor. Go be a writer. And if you're really good, we'll give you work. Or if you're really that good, but you still want to keep your job, you're writing. It's considered part of your salary, right? And that caused a bit of an upheaval. But so much of it was, I remembered that experience. That one really drove it home to me. And then of course that Hulk book didn't sell well at all, and it didn't, and I kept thinking, boy, Priest's Hulk would have been crazy.
Or I would have got canceled along with it. But let me address your policy here for a second, because making it part of your salary, that's fine. That like if that was me, I'd be like, okay, that I don't mind that. That's fine with me. That's what Jeff Johns was doing at DC.
Well,
that's what Jeff
does.
That's
what when I draw something at Marvel, it's just
you don't get a separate check.
I don't get a separate check. No, it's part of. So I have the ability to say I want to do it. I don't want to do it. But I do it because I love doing it.
But my point is, back in the 80s, back in the days the 70s and 80s, first of all, the page rates were low, the salaries were really low. So it was a whole different dynamic. But Jim Shooter's perspective was not only were you allowed to freelance for the company, you were more or less required to, because Jim would kind of get on you if you were a colorist and you were coloring, or you were a letterer and you were lettering. But these people were already established in those fields. They were already a letterer or a colorist or whatever, but his point of view was he wanted us, all of us, editors, to experience what freelancers experience. Because if you've never had to meet a deadline, if you've never had to go through the types of things and the stresses or stressors that these freelancers go through, you're not going to understand it. You're not going to understand how to handle the freelancers well. So that was kind of his thing, where like we would actually get yelled at if we weren't freelancing for the company on some level. So it wasn't about the money. It was about keeping your chops up and the fact that you had all these people sitting here. Now, the odd thing...
But also the big difference is you had shooters sitting on this stuff, and you would write stuff and it would never see print because it wasn't ready.
Oh, yeah.
So by the time that we were doing Marvel Lights, that wasn't there. There was no... It was just like, hey, you got a job, you got a job, we're printing it,
Right. Now just a quick diversion here is at the same time there was this fiefdom going on at Marvel, because you had editorial group and you had the sales group, and I don't know why editorial didn't like sales and promotion. I don't know what that was about, because they both need each other. I don't understand, but I was good friends with this guy in sales. And one day he asked me to read a script, and I hate when your friends come up to you and go, would you read a script?
Jesus, I know where you're going.
But I sat down and I read this Spider-Man script, and it was brilliant. And I went, we got this brilliant writer who's sitting down the hall who can't get work because you don't like the sales department, which was just idiotic. And of course, that writer was a guy named Peter David.
Yep.
And I hired Peter to write Spider-Man stuff, and I took all kind of flack for it. And then after I left Marvel, everybody gave Peter work after I left.
And Peter quit. Peter quit to be a freelancer. He was that
guy.
Yes. You know what I mean?
Yes. He could do it.
That to me is like, that's the goal, right? If you're working on staff,
if you want to be a writer, go be a writer. That's what you're saying.
Yeah. Or just consider it's part of your salary if you really enjoy editing and you could manage both, right? But I think eventually if you're that good a writer and you're getting that kind of that amount of work, you're really going to want to devote that time to that, because that's really where your heart is. Anyway, we diverged here from fan questions, so let's. I want to get through a few more of these.
Sorry.
I said I was going to keep it short, Jim, and you and I can never keep it short. Here's a good one. This comes from Dave. Who are your writing actually, hang on, I gotta go through this. Who are your writing influences? Who do you read now? Do you miss Quantum and Woody? I do. If you could take over writing duties on any comic or title, what would you like to write? Who are your favorite artists to work with? Thanks in advance. Do you remember the Gilda Radner routine on Saturday Night Live where she would do Rosanna Dana?
Rosanna Dana, yeah.
Like, David, you ask a lot of questions, right? So pick. Let's. You know what? I'm gonna pick a couple here. Writing influences.
Denny O'Neil. Let me think. I'm thinking Denny O'Neil. And it's got to be Frank. Yeah. It's got to be Frank. Yeah.
Favorite artist to work with.
Well, if one day maybe you,
right.
But
we haven't
let me
worked
see.
Together, really. Well, I mean, I did layouts in the Panther book, but that's a whole other thing.
Yeah, but you know what? I got to tell you, it's just I really appreciated your storytelling. I just thought your storytelling was just so brilliant, and then text just brings it all to life, and it was just perfect.
I would assume MD is your artist of choice. I mean, you guys work so
well. No. See, Quantum Woody was kind of based on us. We bickered a lot, and Mark hated everything I wrote. I didn't hate everything he drew. It's just that I tried so hard to please him, and it was very frustrating that every month I'd get the phone call and he's complaining about something, and I just Carlo Pagulayan was my artist on Death. And and actually Larry Hama did a bunch of layouts for Carlo, but I loved every page of it. I just and this guy that's doing Vampirella, he works in a very he's not a comic book artist. He's not a Marvel DC guy. It looks more like animation. It looks very cartoony and something you wouldn't expect from Vampirella. But boy, it's this guy Ergon Gunduz, if I'm pronouncing it right. I'm having so much friggin' fun with Ergon. It's unbelievable. I love the guy to death.
Cool, man. Let's see here. How long is your Vampirella run?
How long is it?
Yeah.
It's ongoing. We haven't decided. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
We're all ready into the second year.
Sonny Chiba, can you come back and do another run of Black Panther or Falcon? We've talked about this. Also, why was the crew so underrated? I don't know if it was underrated, but also R. Thomas has a similar question. Your Black Panther run is legendary. We know that. But the excellent spinoff, The Crew, seemed to fall through the cracks. Was it bad timing? Why do you think it didn't take off? Would you do something similar again if given the chance?
All right, The Crew was supposed to be Marvel's stab at Milestone, where I was talking to them not only about publishing the comic book, but about investigating unique ways of distributing the comic book and getting outside of the diamond chain, direct market chain. Right. That part of it never happened. And then when they released the comic book, they were also releasing a big event where they had 5 series or so. I think there was 5 of them, and I forgot what the event was called. But they're releasing this set of books, this 5 books, as part of this event. And somebody in marketing decided, well, since The Crew's coming out that month, why don't we fold The Crew into this event, even though The Crew had nothing to do with this event and had no tie into it whatsoever. And the launch did not go well for whatever this event was, so they pulled the plug on it, and The Crew got caught in that as well. So The Crew actually was canceled before issue 1 even went on sale, and that angered and hurt me a great deal because I thought we were doing good work on that book.
Yeah, you were, and you know what? Sometimes the zeitgeist catches up. I don't know, man. Between you and I.
But then some of this I think was just ahead of its time because
that's what
some of this stuff that in fact some of the stuff you were doing all through the Marvel Knights line I think would actually perform better today, or certainly hold up as well today, because the audience is more sophisticated, and particularly since the brilliant Daredevil Netflix series, where people kind of have expectations. They want the more grown-up, complex stuff, So I think that they released The Crew as part of one of the Black Panther trades, but if you didn't know it was in there, you'd miss it. If they released The Crew as a standalone trade, I think it might find an audience much the same way as the Black Panther series. My Black Panther run found a whole new audience in trades. Where young people are coming up to me at conventions. These people like 19 or 20 years old. You couldn't possibly have read this when I wrote it. But they discovered it in the trades.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that, I don't know if you're interested or whatever, but I think the timing for The Crew, like I said, the zeitgeist sort of catches up, and I think I don't know. Something to think about, Jim. Something to think about. All right, we got a couple more. And I'm going to let you go. We were supposed to do an hour. We're like 2.5 hours, Jim.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. No, listen, I didn't realize until I just checked right now. I'm like, whoa. All right. Hi, Christian Priest. Sir, it's an honor to sort of meet you through this platform and through through the legendary Joe Quesada. My question is, what's your writing process like? How do you come up with an idea for a story, especially for Black Panther? And then he continues, and do you have any advice for an aspiring writer who plans on transitioning from writing novels to being a comic writer? Thank you both.
Don't do it.
Love from Malaysia.
Okay, yeah, don't do it. Anytime I have a writer coming up to me who wants to break into comics writing, I try to discourage him as much as possible.
Oh.
It's tough. It's high volume. It's hard to break in. It's hard to stay in once you do break in. The Black Panther, as far as the run that we did with Marvel Knights, most of that is about reverse engineering. It's like it's trying to you figure out what you want to say in this story, and then you reverse engineer it because the Black Panther is all about him anticipating the moves of his enemy or his adversary, I should say, his adversary. So I kind of figure out the end of the story and then I work backwards. And that's how we're able to present it sort of out of sequence because we jumped around in continuity quite a bit.
Yeah.
But the only way I could do that is if I already knew, what Shala knows. The hardest part about writing Black Panther is that Black Panther is way smarter than the guy writing him, right. And it's an incredibly tough character to write.
Yeah.
To write well, I should say.
Well, you're right about that. So we have one final question. This comes from a friend of mine. She likes to remain anonymous, but she always sends the occasional text question for our guests. Now, we didn't talk about was you're a musician also. We're both musicians. So I like this question. If you and Priest started a band with which other musicians, living or past, would you invite to join?
Well, I'll answer the question in a second, but just ironically, in Quantum and Woody, Woody has this song he plays over and over again, driving Quantum nuts. So right. Willie's a guitarist, and he plays this song called Medicine Woman, and he plays it over and over and over again. And I told my artist Mark, I said, because Mark is a bass guitarist, he's a musician. I said, we should record the song. So I actually wrote that song. That song actually exists. So I wrote that song. Yeah. And I wanted to record it, and I wanted to ask you to play the part of Woody and sing lead on the thing. So I was gonna have Hama and Bright and me and we'd all do it over the internet, obviously, and put it together with Pro Tools, but Mark said, "Oh, Jim, that's just stupid," and I just,
so much
fun.
What? What a blast.
I can't fight with Mark anymore. I'm like, okay, fine. You don't want to do it, then don't do it. But I don't know. I'm really not, as plugged into the music scene as I used to be because I think most of it sucks these days. I like Lenny Kravitz, I guess. My favorite band is The Time. Jimmy Jam, Terry Lewis, Morris Day. Those guys. That kind of thing. But I don't know. In fact, I don't know if you can see it. My piano's right over there. Yeah. So I still play for fun. I'll occasionally play at church whenever they let us go back to church. And then on my website there's a whole ton of music up there. All my really awful demos. It spans from the very awful to the almost ready for prime time. Toward the as you go along, toward the end of my musical career. Yeah. But I would once upon a time I wanted to be a musician, and now I've gotten over it. I think.
Right now you're a comic book guy. This is what you do when you're 40.
I've written hundreds of songs, and they're all on ChristopherPriest.com. They're all up there.
Well, my opening music and closing music is something I wrote years ago too. Back.
Yeah, is that Idle Chatter? Was that from the Idle Chatter?
Idle Chatter. Yeah. So, Jim, did
you put that stuff on iTunes? Are you have any of that stuff out there?
No, I never did. I probably should. I mean, some of it's so incredibly dated. It's definitely.
Doesn't matter.
Late 80s.
Doesn't
90s. Matter. Yeah. I mean, I'll do something with it at some point, but I'm not quite sure what yet. But dude, thank you so much, man. Thanks, Jim. Thanks for being here. You started to have fun. I think you started to have fun a little bit, right? A little bit? A little bit?
Don't push your luck, pal.
Ah, man. Brother, I love you. And we'll talk again, all right? And you got to come up and visit with me again. Stay over at my place again. My daughter's always saying, when is Priest coming back? And I'm like,
oh, yeah, right. Yeah, just tell Nancy to take all the chocolate out of the bedroom. Good God, I'm such a chocoholic, and she left like a big jar of the Hershey's.
Wait, but here's what I don't understand: there was tons of chocolate there, and then you went shopping, and you bought more chocolate.
and then those homemade cookies.
This
know,
dude has a problem. He's got a problem.
God, yeah, I have a serious chocolate problem. Yes, yes.
All right, my friend. Love you, brother. We'll talk soon. Okay. Let me just say goodbye to the folks, and thank you again, Jim. I mean, this is, you know, it's again, we could do this all day long, and we have. So I'll talk to you later, man. All right. See ya.
Yep.
All right.
Bye.
Hey guys, thanks. Hope you enjoyed that. Jim is the best, and you can see why he's an absolute legend of the comic industry. So thanks for indulging us. Again, stay safe. Wash your hands, wear your masks, and next issue, I'm gonna throw a little curveball. Got my buddy Jordan Hembro, the toy hunter. We're gonna be talking about toys, not just comic books, but also how they relate to comics and all sorts of stuff. So if you're a toy fanatic and you want to hear, you know, Jordan talk about this world, it's a world that I know a little bit about, not a lot about. So it'll be educational for me. So it's gonna be a lot of fun. We're gonna have Jordan on. That should be next week. I'm gonna shoot for next Monday if everything goes well. So guys, thanks a lot. Love you. As always, we will be continued, and I will see you in the funny books.
We were kings of